listen, I'm coming to DC a lot. My daughter's getting married here. And how about we get like a bipartisan panel and thinking how professors think. Let's host it at the Hilton. $300 a head. And surely people will come. I'm like, Robert, that's a fantastic idea. I have some edits. How about we host it at Busboys and Poets? He goes, ooh, what's that? Yeah, give a round of applause to Busboys and Poets. And with the power vested in me by myself, speaking on behalf of Andy, who I had not consulted, I said, I think Andy will be down for this. And so he goes, okay, Waj, I'll take your lead. So I call up Andy. This is all last Thursday. I'm like, Andy, I think we could get like a goated bipartisan panel against Forever Wars. We have Robert, we have me, we have Joe. And I just threw in Olivia's name, did not talk to her. I'm like, we're going to get Olivia Troye, and Mehdi owes me some favors. If not, I'll call his wife. She'll bring him. We'll get Mehdi, Hasan. We'll bring a few other people. We'll get Trita, Parsi. Again, didn't talk to any of these people. And Robert's like, ooh, yes, Trita, Mehdi, Olivia, fantastic. And then by the end of the next day, we had the panel. So this all came together in 7 days. And we were expecting to get 100 people. We have 200 people. And we have 5 minutes to showtime. So, folks, this is the first ever strategic forum hosted by the Escalation Trap, which is Robert's Substack. Anyone here who's a subscriber? Thank you, right? And the Left Hook. Anyone here to the subscriber to my humble Substack? All right. So it's the first ever a strategic forum, and we're in partnership today with Zeteo, with Quincy Institute, and I never thought I would say this in my life, the American Conservative. All right? So you truly, I know, hell has frozen over. We are in the 7th level of hell. Enjoy your halal pina coladas. But we've all come together for this event, and the event is hopefully the first of many. If this goes well, inshallah it will, the first of many strategic forums. The first one is How to End Forever Wars. And I would like to thank and give a massive shout out to this man, Andy Shalal. My kids didn't come because they don't care. But my family was supposed to come. But my kids' favorite restaurant is Busboys and Poets. And real quick, when my daughter was going through stage 4 cancer, she's cancer-free, liver transplant, diva. Her favorite restaurant was the Busboys and Poets restaurant in Shirlington. And when she was going through it, all the servers knew what she was going through, and several of them signed up to be liver donors. And so they love this place. Andy, I'm so old, I remember when Andy just had 1 or 2 Busboys and Poets. Andy, in the year 2026, tell him how many you have now. Mashallah, no evil eye.
9.
9. In fact, there's a Busboy and Poets opening up at DCA Airport. So give it up to Andy Shalom. And for everyone who's watching at home, wish you could be here. Let's just go. Let's start. Y'all ready? All right, let's do this. Never mind. Andy says wait a couple more minutes. He knows. I'm not going to say no to the boss man. All right, Curt's here, so we got our conservatives. They finally let the conservatives in. Thank you, Curt. Thank you, Joe, for coming. Come on in. And we're waiting for Mehdi, who's a diva, is going to come late, but he'll be here. Folks, again, we're going to start first panel, 40-ish minutes, Q&A. I will say this. I'm moderating for Q&A. We love brevity. Make love to brevity. I'm looking for questions. I know you have, mashallah, beautiful, eloquent things to say. If there's not a question mark at the end, I might cut you off in interest of time. All right? We all good? All right. First panel, we're going to have, I'm just going to mention the bios real quick before we start. First panel, we have an authentic Iranian American, the representative of all Iranian Americans today, by the power vested in me. But she is a superstar. She is really awesome. She said yes. I'm so happy. She is a professor at Johns Hopkins University. We have Professor, yes, you could give some round of applause to Johns Hopkins. Narges Bajoghli, did I pronounce it right? I know I did. Writer, scholar, public intellectual, who's, I have to cut this down. They're so obnoxiously talented. Each one of their like bios is like 3 pages, so it's going to be a paragraph. Forgive me if I forget anything. Writer, scholar, public intellectual whose work explored the intersections of revolutions, media, and war and global politics. Associate professor of anthropology and Middle East studies at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, where she co-directs the Rethinking Iran Initiative and leads Parallax, the Human Stories Lab, a space for ethnographic research, storytelling, and multimedia engagement. She is the author of the forthcoming book. When is the book coming out? 2028, Workshop of War, which traces the legacy of chemical weapons from the Iran-Iraq War to the present, arguing that the Middle East has become a laboratory for global military experimentation. Give it up for Professor Narges. All right. Second panelist, Olivia Troye. She said, oh boy. It's all right, it's a safe space. Everyone likes you, don't worry. American national security official who worked on the national security and homeland security issues at the Department of Defense, National Counterterrorism Center, the United States Department of Energy Office of Intelligence and Counterintelligence, and the DHS. What else did you do, Olivia? The Latina, daughter of immigrants, overachievers. She went on to work for the Office of the Vice President of the United States at the Homeland Security and Counterterrorism Advisor to Vice President Mike Pence in the first Trump administration, where, believe it or not, she actually voted for Clinton. But she's like, I want to make sure there's no psychopaths in this administration, so I'll come in. She has stories. She will tell them. She was his lead staffer on the task force. She resigned from the White House in August 2020. She is a whistleblower. She was running for the 2026 Democratic primary for Virginia's 7th Congressional District until the Republican Supreme Court here decided to undo our election results. Olivia Troye. Not boo for you. That was the boo for the state Supreme Court. And then our third panelist for the first panel, Curt Mills, Executive Director of the American Conservative Magazine in Washington, D.C. His work on foreign policy and the Trump movement is frequently cited in the New York Times, Financial Times, and Wall Street Journal, among many others. And he has a great profile up right now on Jewish currents, why this conservative man is one of the most vociferous opponents of this war. Give it up for Curt Mills. All right, you all join me on stage, please. And to kick us off, we have a professor. Will he limit himself to 5 minutes? Inshallah, we will see. Give it up for University of Chicago Professor Robert Pape.
Thank you, Waj. That was just absolutely spectacular. I just want to say thank you all for coming tonight. I want to say my big thanks here to all of our partners here, especially Waj. And also all of these fantastic speakers. This is just an unbelievable lineup that has come together. Now, I started this thing called the escalation trap. I started this a few days before the war kicked off, and I thought this was going to be a small group of eggheads who were going to be interested in some of the frameworks around escalation. And little did I know that within just a few weeks, this thing has ballooned up to 65,000 followers. Unbelievable. All over, yeah, unbelievable. All over the world, and also all across the political spectrum. So you will see me in all the different things you watch, but you probably don't watch the other side. So just so you know, I'm often on Chris Hayes once a week. I'm also often on Newsmax once a week. And you're saying, oh my God, how can that possibly be? Well, I just got to tell you, I wasn't expecting that either. So I'm not, and literally here tonight, there's CNN wanted me on tonight, and Chris Cuomo wanted me on tonight. And so it's literally every, and it's across the spectrum. Well, that's what gave me an idea that maybe we could try an in-person event. Maybe we could try to see, could we do something from online to in-person and cut across the spectrum. It's not because there's any idea that people are going to vote for the same candidate. This isn't about that. This is what I'm seeing. What I'm seeing is across the spectrum, number one, people think this war is a gigantic disaster. Okay? So this is not unique in our body politic right now. Number two, people are constantly asking, what can we do? We're in an escalation trap. That's what I will explain. There's a trap. We're stuck right now. But are we destined for another forever war? Is that really possible that we could be coming out of 2 forever wars and within just a few years, we are now stuck? Well, I got to tell you, I am up, even though I'm going to tell you we're in a trap, we're at a fork in the road, I am extremely optimistic, and it's because of you folks. That 65,000 that I'm seeing that came from nowhere to that, who knew me from Adam, went like that far. And I think what you're seeing tonight, you just heard Waj explain. Literally, I call him up with this crazy idea. And why did I call Waj? Well, you just saw why. I'm a professor, okay? I'm a real professor, okay? And I had all these, I had a big idea, but you just heard, I had bad ideas about how to do it. And so what does Waj do? He says, let me just give you some advice, some thoughts here. And it turned out to be brilliant. And look at what has happened tonight. I think that there's some, I don't know how many are going to watch this because we're going to have the video. I wouldn't be surprised if we get 100,000 views here going after tonight. The final thing I want to say is, since World War II, we have had already 3 forever wars. We had Vietnam. Most of you, of course, not going to know about that. Okay, some of you will. I was just a kid. We also had Iraq and we have Afghanistan. What's a forever war? It's waste. It is waste, first and foremost. Wasted lives lost in those forever wars. Wasted money. How much did Iraq and Afghanistan cost us? Somewhere around $5 trillion just in money. Think about that. That's bigger than we could have possibly. But imagine if we had put that into housing. Housing. Imagine we invest in people here in the United States. Here, think of what we could have done with $5 trillion. So, and also those 2 forever wars, 6,600 dead Americans here lost their lives in those wars. Here, that's twice as many who died on 9/11, just more than that, just to put it in that perspective. And yes, we're grateful for their service, but think of the waste that really represents here. And notice, I'm not even talking about Vietnam. That is another whole situation. So we have an enormous reason to come together. And I'm not saying, again, we come together to vote for the same. I think we're bigger than that because we're seeing something, which is this foreign policy is not working, okay? Okay, it's just not working, okay? And I'm seeing that from one side of the spectrum, from the other side, and from the middle. And I think we need to recognize there's a lot we're never going to agree on. There's a lot we can agree on, and we can move this forward. And I believe that this is possible, and I want to see what you guys think when this is all done here. And just, I'm going to be interested because I would like to see if this could be replicated in Chicago, in Austin, in New York City. And by the way, you could give me some advice about, because you can hear from him, I don't know where to go. Tell me what the equivalent is, or maybe you're going to open up some new spots here. By the time we're done, he'll be having another 3. Exactly. So I really believe this is what tonight's about. I really appreciate everybody being involved. And for me, this is what gives me real optimism as we go forward. Because, look, the presidents are going to be imperial. That's just the way it is. Lobbies are going to lobby for their special interests. And if it's not Israel, it's defense contractors. That's the way it is. But we're seeing something we've not seen in a potential forever war before. From the get-go, this is not popular. So let's stop it in its tracks. Let's prevent, for the first time, a forever war before it gets started. Wouldn't that be an amazing accomplishment? That's what I think we can do. So I may have gone. So thank you all, and now I hand it back over.
I got mine. We're good. All right, let's do this. How to end forever wars. Before we talk about how we get to the future, we have to talk how we got here in the present situation. In this unwinnable quagmire, we're 3 months into this war, Narges. There is an escalation to the point where there's food shortages in the Asia Pacific, energy crisis. Americans are feeling it at the gas stations. We're not even talking about helium yet, because Qatar produces about 25% of the world's helium. So get your MRIs now. Lost life, war crimes, and we have a president who yesterday said the Strait of Hormuz is open, and then 10 seconds later said we have to open up the Strait of Hormuz. I'm not making that up. Thank you. Thank you. Really, there you go. Yeah, I like it. I like how the bar was so low. He goes, that's not bad. I want to take it back, though. You talked about how Iran in particular, and let's focus on Iran, is the laboratory for America's forever wars. And I want to take the DeLorean back to 1979. However, if you want to be really ambitious, maybe we could take the DeLorean back to 1953. If you can connect the dots to how we got here, how Iran in particular was the laboratory for America's bloodthirsty obsession with forever wars.
Sure. Thanks for that question, and good evening, everyone. So America is allergic to countries that want to have their own sovereignty. Iran started this quest in the 1950s with the Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh at the time, who decided to nationalize Iran's oil. And in so doing, he became the first third world leader to do so. That became unacceptable to the rising great power at the time, which was the United States. And so Iran had to be made an example of. The CIA was just established, and the first coup that the CIA carried out was in Iran in 1953. And then that became the blueprint for the Guatemalan coup d'etat the year later, and so on and so forth. That coup d'etat also laid a lot of the grievances that led eventually to the 1979 revolution. Now, a lot of people tend to think about the 79 revolution in a sense of, okay, the Islamic Republic came about, good, bad, I hate it, I love it. But I think that's actually the wrong way to even think about what happened in 1979. There are two central core desires for the 1979 revolution. And if you remember, or if you've read about it, it was one of the last big, greatest revolutions of the 20th century. It was a mass movement from below that led to the toppling of the U.S. Pakistan and sort of brought in a desire for two main things. One, dignity for Iranians in relationship to their governing establishment, and number two, the desire for independence and sovereignty. That desire for independence and sovereignty has been present in Iranian society for over 150 years. That is not something that has come about, and that is not something that's going to go away just because there's Israeli astroturfing campaigns to bring back, the son of the former Shah. So what this means is that when a country the size of Iran, which is as big as Western Europe is, a continental force in many ways, basically pushed out the United States and said that we want to be able to establish our politics and our desires independently and sovereignly, that was something that was not okay by the United States. And so what ended up happening is pretty much on the heels of the revolution of 79, you have the Iran-Iraq war start. That is the first major war in which the United States begins, in essence, major proxy warfare in the Middle East. All of the major Western European countries, Arab countries are backing Iraq, both intel-wise, weapons-wise, and really importantly, and this is where the arguments for my book start, is that it becomes the first place where massive amounts of chemical and nerve agents are used. Chemical weapons that had not been used since the First World War were used in mass for 5 years of the Iran-Iraq war, and nerve agents that had never been used in the history of warfare were tested in the Iran-Iraq war on the bodies of Iranian soldiers and civilians and Iraqi soldiers as well. And vast loss of Kurdistan, both on the Iranian side and on the Iraqi side of the border. For those 5 years in which these weapons were used, the Iranians were, thank you so much. The Iranians, I hope you guys heard me. For those 5 years that these chemical and nerve agents were used, the Iranians were pleading with the UN to conduct fact-finding missions. 7 fact-finding missions took place during the 1980s, and they came back conclusively that chemical and nerve agents had been used. But yet, nonetheless, because it was Western powers that were supplying the intel and much of the precursors for these chemical weapons, absolutely nothing was done. So it becomes the blueprint for looking away. The Iran-Iraq war becomes the hinge point in the history of modern Middle East politics, in which massive amounts of chemical and nerve and sort of experimental weapons could be used, and the international community would do nothing about it. That then opened the way for depleted uranium to be used in Iraq. That opened the way for white phosphorus to be used in Palestine and Lebanon. And that opened the way for essentially what we have today, which is forever wars that have the architecture of US sanctions built first and foremost before you even get to hot warfare. So sanctions are a precursor and the start of a forever war. They are not something that comes on just because we don't tend to like Saddam's Iraq or Iran's Islamic Republic. They are the precursors for all of these forever wars. And then on top of that, you then begin to have a space in which all of these countries become experimentations.
That was awesome. Well done. I can't use it.
Yeah.
So Iran, there you go. Iran was the blueprint for what later becomes this imperial project, the Forever Wars, which we have seen in our lifetime, the failed war on terror. And here we come to 2026, where for the past 3 months, the United States of America is engaged in an unwinnable quagmire in Iran. And Olivia, previous presidents, and I have my opinions on several of them, Republicans and Democrats, at the very least, even George W. Bush, he's like, I'm going to do something very disastrous. I'm going to do a war in Iraq. But even I know not to go in Iran. And then lo and behold, we have Donald Trump. And he goes, you know what? I'm going to blow up the US-Iran deal, even though it was very successful. I'm going to show the world that the United States can't be trusted. I'm going to actually, if you will, entrench Iran to double down in militarism, even though they came to us in good faith. In addition, last year, what I'm going to do is I'm going to join Israel in its 12-day war. And I'm going to brag about blowing up Iran's nuclear weapons, even though I only degraded it, but who needs facts? And then I'm going to go against even my own experts. I'm going to go against, Coates? I'm going to go against Marco Rubio. I'm going to go against J.D. Vance, according to the New York Times reporting. And I'm going to go ahead and agree with Benjamin Netanyahu, and it's going to be super easy. I'm going to take out Khamenei, and then all these Iranians will welcome me, and everything's going to be awesome. Now, we have to understand the mindset of this administration. And you are actually one of the very few people who was an unfortunate fly in the wall in this administration. You have heard Stephen Miller. You have heard Donald Trump. Take us back in the DeLorean to 2016. The mindset of this administration, the way they view the world, the way they view people of color, the way they view resources and oil, and why you are not surprised that Donald Trump is the first president in history to do something so catastrophic.
I feel like you were making a trajectory. I think, does this work? I was a Texas cheerleader, so I can just scream back in the day. Anyways, I think I was getting anxiety because I felt like you were tracking the trajectory of my career, because I did. I was like, I'm with you. Where's he going with this? And so candidly, I mean, I was there for the buildup. I did serve in the Bush administration. I remember the lead up to Iraq. I was in the Pentagon for the pre-war planning. I deployed to Iraq. I was there. I was actually Paul Bremer's aide. I sat through every meeting in the lead up to that thing, both before, during, after. I have seen this thing firsthand. And that is, I share that with you because I went from someone that saw that, believed in the premise of how we were going to go in, believed in the intelligence at the time. We've learned a lot since then, I would say. And I'm here as someone who is completely anti-war now. And that just tells you about how I have progressed throughout my entire career in 20 years. And so what I would say about 2016 and during the time frame that I was there, obviously I was at DHS at the beginning of that, but I later, I had a lot of interactions with Stephen Miller, Press Vote. Me too. I'm still going to therapy. And I would say, I think especially for someone like me who grew up as a very conservative Latina in a very conservative Catholic household, who, by the way, I also happen to be part Jewish, and I will share that openly. It was interesting sort of walking into the space. Yes, I had voted for Hillary Clinton, mostly because I detested the rhetoric of Donald Trump when he was on the campaign trail, the lead up to it. And I had hoped that he would grow into his role and change. I think a lot of people at the time thought that might happen. That never did. And so as I watched these engagements and cabinet meetings and the interactions, what I would say at the time is that there were credible adults in the room who really understood the ramifications of national security. But unfortunately, when it comes to Donald Trump, it is more the extreme voices and the last person in his ear that sometimes do control the narrative. And you see that sort of happen firsthand in these developments when you have people like, you mentioned Dan Coates, at the time we had Jim Mattis, we had John Kelly. These are credible people that have long time careers in military who at times were strategically opposed to some of the things that Donald Trump would bring up. And I say this because, we had Mark Esper there back in the day. He did bring up bombing Iran. He did bring up bombing Venezuela. These are all things, Mike Pence, he was out there shouting Libertad. That was Mike Pence's thing, Libertad for Venezuela, over and over again. But in the aftermath of it, it was sort of like, well, what happens then for the day after? Which is a conversation that I think really should have happened in the Bush administration, which I think they did. Because I feel like the thing with us is that we're not very good at the nation building. You and I have talked about that. I have the utmost respect for our military and their operational planning. They carry out those missions very well. That is their job and they do it well. I think around the table, though, when you get people that are in civilian leadership who are pretty disconnected at times with the reality of the ground and how the aftermath goes, that's where the disconnect happens. And I feel like the United States, for some reason, has not learned these lessons firsthand. And so when you have the likes of Stephen Miller, who have their own approach and view of the world, and I would say it is pretty extreme. And it is.
You could say it's very extreme. This is a safe space.
It's very, yeah. It is, he has a view of the world where I did hear him say in meetings, like, why would we want any of these Iraqi communities in the US? Why do you want little Afghans running around? Well, at the time we were talking about Afghan and Iraqi translators who were serving side by side with us, deployed with us, and keeping us safe on the ground. So it was just sort of those conversations, which really showed me that we were at a crossroads here with people in the room and that ideology. But at the time, I would say, these other voices were able to push back on that. And they were like, hey, Stephen, go back to your cave. Go back. The problem today is that these are the people that sort of have the power. They have risen through power. And he is a voice in the room, whether you believe some of the reporting or not that he's been backtracked. I think it's because they know that it's completely bad optics. And they've really stepped in at this time.
I want to do a quick follow-up. Curt, I'm going to get you in, I promise. Quick follow-up is this. What you shared with me when we talked was that you war-gamed this scenario. You war-gamed what would a war with Iran look like. In all of your war games, the conclusion was disaster. So they war-gamed this, and despite the war-gaming, they still said, nah, let's do it.
Yeah, that's why I don't believe. Like, every president is briefed. You're told, hey, the biggest thing that Iran has and the biggest issue here is how do you navigate the strait and what happens in the aftermath. So I've heard people say, in the aftermath of this currently, that he wasn't aware of it. Bullshit. Sorry. But that is.
And is this a safe space for bullshit?
Absolutely.
I try not to curse, and sometimes it slips out. Sorry, I was deployed with a lot of Navy SEALs. Stuck. So I would say that is the issue, though, is looking at this from the holistic perspective. You can war game this, and when he would say that you want to bomb, you tell him. And the reality is, yes, it's the street. And there's a reason that we haven't done this in the way we've approached it. But you certainly cannot approach it with a chaotic lack of strategy where you have no idea really in the aftermath of how you're going to navigate it. Because really, that is not actually strategically in the security of the United States and the people.
Speaking about the chaos, I think we should focus on the fact that when we talk about waste, when we talk about money, we have to talk about people. In Lebanon, 1 million people have been displaced. Israel is occupying Lebanon right now. More than 1 million. Also Syria. When we talk about Iran, what's the death toll now? It's 3,000? 3,000. Lebanon, Rania, 3,000 people. A double tap on a school of girls. Triple tap. where there was faulty AI, and the United States sent a triple tap on a school, 165 dead Iranian schoolgirls. And that's not even talking about the global famine. And that's not even talking about petroleum. That's not even talking about fuel and gas and energy, right? That's not even talking about the fact that the Strait of Hormuz was open and now it's closed. Curt, I have retweeted you without realizing who you are. And I'm like, this young man, Curt, is making good points. And then Trita was like, bring on Curt Mills of American Conservative. So I researched you. And I'm like, oh, I've tweeted it. Oh, I've tweeted this guy. He's made very good points. Curt, you have to realize why that's so shocking to me. I'm a 45-year-old broken middle-aged man. In my life, every single war in the Middle East, there has been rah, rah, rah. A majority of Americans at first have always said, yes, war on terror. Yes, go get them. I'm a product of 80s Hollywood movies. This war, from the get-go, did not get bipartisan support. This war, from the get-go, a majority of Americans said no. And you have been very vociferous, very vocal against fellow conservatives against this war. Why this war? Why is this the flashpoint? Why is this the breaking point for so many young conservatives to break from the neocon model, which was the status quo for the past, I would say, 40 years?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me and thank you for being here. I think it's important to zoom out. Number one, there is actually a conservative anti-war tradition. It hasn't been in the cockpit in recent administrations, more or less. But, you know, it stems back to, honestly, if you want to go before 1953, there were conservatives against World War I, et cetera, et cetera. Our magazine, though, was founded in 2002, so almost 25 years ago, against the Iraq War by conservatives and friends against the Bush administration's drive to war. But what is most maddening, but also promising of the Trump moment is that Trump himself, of course, is not a Bush conservative, at least on paper, at least by rhetoric. He very much ran against, in 2016, against the Iraq War. He called it a big fat mistake. He took down the Bush family. I think you would remember Jeb Bush. And yeah, yes. And he ran very much, you can say it's just rhetoric, as against endless wars type of candidate. This Iran war is the biggest violation of a campaign pledge in at least a generation. People would go back to no new taxes under George H.W. Bush, but at least taxes don't directly kill people. It is a serious betrayal. However, what is different about Trump than Bush is that Trump clearly doesn't believe in very much at this point, if he ever did. And I think there remains a chance for an off-ramp on this war that did not exist with the Iraq War. Bush was going to stay. He believed in the war. It's generally good to believe in things and try to do them. But the flip side is if you're wrong, you get burned. The flip side of Trump is that I do believe he is responding to pressure. I do believe he is noticing the anti-war conservative movement. His first reaction is to try to crush it, as he did attempted with Thomas Massie this week in Kentucky. But there are two different ways of looking at that result. 55% of people sided pretty slavishly with the administration on the war, but 45% of people in a deep red district in Kentucky voted against the Iran war this week. That's substantial. This is the most unpopular war in American history. The president is less popular today than Herbert Hoover ever was during his administration. It's not good, and it can't be just siloed off into foreign policy. It is directly affecting the economy, which he cares about, which affects his political prospects, which affects the House, the Senate, etc.
You can applaud that. I think you made a good point. Trump, even in 2024, he had three major promises to especially his conservative base. We are going to release the Epstein files because the Epstein files is the Rosetta Stone for QAnon. Which one? You tell me. What am I doing? It's a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy. Yeah, we could talk. You all can hear me, right? All right. Here we go. How's that? You all can hear me? Bueller. All right. So we got 3 promises broken. First promise, I'm going to release the Epstein files. Whoopsie, I mentioned more of the Epstein files than even Jeffrey Epstein. So cover up. Number 2, no more forever wars. Whoopsie, here comes Venezuela, trade war, Canada, maybe Cuba, hopefully not Iran. And then third promise, I'm going to bring down the cost of groceries. And no, 3 major crises, right? And what we also see, and I want to do a follow-up before I go to Narges, is what we've seen is 58% of young Republicans now, which is wild to me, want a break with Israel, our relationship with Israel. Now, within those circles, there is a disturbing trend of, I will just say it, anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic conspiracies. But there are others who say, listen, man, I can't afford a job. Why is my money going to Israel? Talk to us about this 58% number, which I think is fascinating. Why this sudden generational break where Ted Cruz is like, young Republicans, we got to support Israel. And perhaps your base is like, nah.
I mean, look, I think this is going on in both parties. I think there's a gulf between basically baby boomers in this country and everybody else. I go back and forth on how useful it is to really emphasize on it because there's tons of baby boomers who recognize that we're $40 trillion in debt and that broadly speaking, their leadership of institutions in corporate America and in the public sector hasn't worked. But it is what it is. I don't think it's unique to the right. I think it's a double-edged sword because there could be a lot of damage done in the near and medium term, but I think the long-term trajectory is pretty good. I still wouldn't want to have the cards of the people who want to get us in these wars. Again, look at that massive primary vote in Kentucky. Plus 30 for Gowrine, the person they plucked out of nowhere to run for this seat, doesn't seem to know very much. Plus 30 across under 65 demographics across the board by most of the polling that's out there for Massey. I do think the future is bright. It's just limiting the damage in the near and medium term. You mentioned the broken promises, and one that I don't think is going to unite anybody in this room, but a central promise of Trump was limiting immigration and closing the border and reforming our immigration laws. And you mentioned Stephen Miller. I think it is curious, though, and I think everyone would agree, that the United States shouldn't actively cause refugee crises. And you are at a point now where Miller, I think, against refugee crises.
There's still some level of humanity left for us to embrace. Thank you.
And I think you see someone like Miller taking an extreme gamble for his position. Robert Gates, the Republican former Secretary of Defense and CIA director who worked for Bush and Obama, gave a very interesting interview over the weekend where he said, if the U.S. knocks over the Cuban government, I think it will cause a refugee crisis. Miller has gone on television defending a potential regime change war with Cuba. I think that anybody who wants to control the border should think very, very carefully of aligning themselves with neoconservative, Israel-first foreign policy. Thank you.
All right. So with Thomas Massey, for those who haven't followed, Massey lost, but he lost thanks to $35 million infusion in his primary race, which broke records. The previous records were the type of money that went to unseat Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush by AIPAC. So 35 million still goes a long way, but what it does is further alienate Republicans. And speaking about some good news, I mean, the bar is in hell, so I got to really pick Narges. But yesterday, I don't know if you all followed, the GOP had to pull a measure to end the Iran war because they feared they lacked the votes to defeat it. So you're seeing little by little defection within the GOP as well. It's growing. But we have to talk about, Narges, because you have to talk about the rampaging elephant in the room. Suppose the United States and Iran, they get some sort of ceasefire, okay? Great. Israel, especially with this regime, says, okay, well, we're going to do what we're going to do. And talk to us about the Gazification of the Middle East, the fact that we're following Israel into ruin and what we need to do to break away from Israel, because how do you rein in Israel when Israel has shown itself through its action? I'm talking about a nation state that we don't care. We're going to continue, as Rania said, even during the ceasefire, bombing Lebanon. Who's going to stop us?
So I think this is where what was previously said is important, is that in the United States, we are the biggest supporters of Israel in the world. And so this is why I think it is such a generational issue for my generation of millennials, for Gen Zs, who are all of my students. We have known nothing but forever wars our entire lives. We are sick and tired of it. We see my children are going to schools that are falling apart. We're driving on roads that are falling apart. Nothing seems to be working here. And we don't seem to see an end in sight, which is why I think there is a very big, it's the first time in my life that I have seen a bipartisan coming together, like there's a shoehorn happening, where on the conservative end and on the, I won't say liberal end, but more progressive end, we see folks coming together around these kinds of issues of our foreign policy. I never thought I would be America first in the ways that it's defined on the conservative end. But if the way that it is defined is that what we care about is not being having all of these wars, especially in the Middle East, but also the Monroe Doctrine, which, you know, Trump sort of reclaimed the Monroe Doctrine of the 19th century, and in essence, the rest of Latin America being our backyard, which is why we had what happened in Venezuela with the kidnapping of Maduro, and then also what we will hopefully not see, but it seems like it will be very likely, which is some kind of regime change operation in Cuba. These are things that on both ends of the spectrum make absolutely no sense for our generation anymore, and it doesn't matter what side of the political aisle you are on. Now, on the question of Israel, I think this is where a lot of this political steam is coming from, which is that we need to put pressure. Americans, we have been really bad at having sustained concentration on our foreign policy as a political issue that we really care about and that we organize around. These wars, and especially the genocide in Gaza, what it has done is it has opened our eyes to what all of these wars on terror in the Middle East have meant, what they have been fought for, what it meant to paint an entire region of the world as, I mean, I remember one of the things that stuck out so much to me during the height of the genocide in Gaza was so much commentary online of, wow, we had no idea that Arab men could be so kind to their children. And that is heartbreaking, actually, to hear that. And it was a very real conversation because we have been propagandized for 50 years, consistently, every single night. I mean, another reason I say Iran is sort of the hinge point in which the Middle East becomes a workshop of war is because the coverage of the Iran hostage crisis, which became a show, those of you who are old enough might remember, called America Held Hostage and eventually becomes Nightline, was the first show on television on a nightly basis where when Ted Koppel would come on air, before he came on air, he would call up his producer and say, I have nothing, and I've done all the interviews for this, so I'm quoting, I have nothing to air tonight. What do I do? And Rune Arledge, who was the president of ABC at the time, said, I don't care what you say. Tell me the difference between a Sunni and a Shia. Tell me what an Ayatollah is. Just fill up that time. We need that time because it made a lot of advertisement dollars. And so our entire, and Nightline was the precursor to our 24-hour news cycle. Our entire media DNA has been built on demonizing an entire region of the world in order for, in essence, to eventually allow for the Greater Israel Project. We are now at a stage in the United States where we are done with that. But what that means is that we have to organize and we have to understand how do you turn that rage, that sort of why are we spending these monies abroad, all of this money abroad instead of focusing on what we need here in the United States. That needs to be a political movement. And that is why, as dark as this moment is, one of the sort of silver linings is going back to what my fellow panelists have been saying, is that this is a moment in which across the political aisle and across the political spectrum, we see people willing to come together on this issue.
Get your questions ready. We'll have it in about 5 minutes. But Olivia, I'm here. I brought you here because I want you to spill tea. And I know you got things to get off your chest. And you talked about, you know, you're Jewish American as well. And you ran, I mean, Olivia's had a really amazing anime hero arc. Conservative, votes for Clinton, but decides to go in the 2016 administration, then's a whistleblower, then runs as a Democrat like last month. And then you told me, excuse me, well, you told me when this issue comes up, it's not just Republicans. It's a bipartisan issue. And when we were talking, I interviewed you when you were a candidate. You were telling me that your advisors, your Democratic advisors, were saying, you know, well, you told me, don't go on Wajah's show. Why'd you go on Wajah's show? And then they said, when it came to the Israel question, don't say the word genocide ever, what you do. And I'm like, it's the year 2026. And the New York Times poll literally just came out yesterday that said an overwhelming majority of Democrats agree that's a genocide and want a restructuring of the policy, as Narges said. And a majority of Americans say it. And yet the Democratic establishment, the consultants are like, nah, let's stick with 1992. What can you spill?
I think what I found was that I was really constantly being told to be something other that I'm not. And I think that is fundamentally, I think, a problem in our, hello, is it better? Okay. I think that's fundamentally sort of a reckoning that I think will have to happen in the Democratic Party.
I just
do
want to repeat that. You
strongly
were told
believe that.
to be something that you're not.
Yeah. And I think that for me, it would be inauthentic to become that, especially if I'm going to own the brand. I mean, I did come, I'm known as a truth teller. I was a whistleblower. I came forward and had criticisms about Donald Trump and what I was seeing and how I felt strongly morally that I felt with every part of my being that I would do this. And I resigned from my career and I do that. So I ran because, one, when this war happened, I was enraged and irate and so angry. And that was part of the calculus in choosing to run for office. It's not something that I ever thought I wanted to do. If it were up to me, I'd be in some foxhole still in the intel community. No one would ever know my name and no one was ever supposed to know my name. And I made a conscious decision. But what I found was I did have these conversations and it was very strange because I would say, well, you know, I believe that people should have health care. And they're like, oh, well, be careful. Where are you going? Where are you going with that? And I was like, that I believe people should have health care. I think everyone should have access to health care. Like, what does that mean? Like, I mean, then the Latina comes out, right? The little Mexican comes out and I'm like, what I just said is what I mean. And they're like, well, do you mean, is that Medicare for all? Because you got to be careful because then you're a Bernie person. And I was like, I just mean that people should have access to health care. That is what I mean. Why can't I just say that? Like, it was so confusing for me, especially as an intel officer, because like in the school of Donald Rumsfeld, when you went in, if you couldn't get it out in the first like literally 10 seconds, you were basically shown the door, right? Like you got to have it locked down and say it. So I'm like, all right, noted. I got to be careful what I say about healthcare, even though I believe in Medicaid and I believe in healthcare access. I'm not saying get rid of private insurance. Okay, we can have that debate. I'm just saying that I believe in this country, at this point where we are, people should have that. That's all I am. Okay, so then it got to other issues, and I think it was interesting because you and I have been on a lot. And I was like, oh yeah, so I'm gonna go on Waj's show on Friday. And they were like, you're gonna do what? And I was like, they're like, you just launched your campaign. And I was like, which is why I'm going to go and talk to Waj, because he's gonna press me. We're gonna have an honest conversation. Maybe he'll push boundaries on me. But this is an important conversation to have because I want people to know how I have evolved, where I am on things. I want them to get to know me. And they were like, that's a really bad idea. Okay. Right, once again. Okay, so who am I supposed to be? And I say this because I think that we're in a moment where people just want authenticity and they want you to be real. And I think they can see right through you, and I don't know any other way to be. So when it came to the Israel question and the genocide question, which was obviously very sensitive for me, right? I will be honest, I found out more recently that I am of Jewish descent. It's something that I've always gravitated towards, but it turns out that it is in my DNA. And my family has, adopted practices. We do Shabbat, and it's a growing thing. It's very personal for me in that journey. But it has been very challenging to kind of navigate this because they were like, well, you can't say genocide.
Yeah, told me that.
And I understand that. There's a sensitive viewpoint on that when you do that, it could create more anti-Semitism, more anti-Jewish. And like, I am anti-hate in general, right? I mean, I opposed Donald Trump when he would call it the Kung flu, virus. I thought I detested that. I was like, there's going to be hate crimes that rise with that. I've dealt with mass shootings based on hate crimes. Like, I am anti-hate across the board. But I think it was very interesting because it was sort of this disconnect with consultants who really viewed things in a certain way. And there's a disconnect between, I think, where general people are. And so for me, it was just very interesting to navigate this space. And I say this as a former candidate because I was like, well, then I think that you're confused about where you are as a party, because look, I mean, if everyone's looking at me and they're like, well, why should we trust you as a Republican? I'm like, well, because trust me, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. So that's why you should trust me, because here I am, and I'm a testament to that. Now, yeah, are we going to agree on everything? No, but I think that if you're going to be welcoming, last I checked, I thought that if you want to grow a bigger tent, you're going to have to accept people from different viewpoints and the way they are. But here I am talking about things that I think a lot of the Democratic establishment, when it comes to the voters, are looking at across the board, maybe even independents. But it was just very fascinating to me that it was a certain consultant class that is really disconnected about how they view things and what they want to mold you to. And so, you know, I have passed that on to people that I think are going to seek higher office, to be honest. I've actually walked up to one person that I think will become a presidential candidate. My advice to that individual, because I saw transitions with Mike Pence, I saw Kamala Harris on the campaign, was whatever you do, don't let them manufacture you into something that you're actually not. Be the same person that you are in the back room on stage, and you'll go a lot further. I mean, that was just me as a person talking to this person and saying, that's my advice.
Who's the person?
I'm not telling you that one.
And this advice was given to her last month, folks, by the Democrat advisors who are in the nation's capital. Before we open up to Q&A, I want to ask this question. We're talking about moving forward. Curt, suppose you are Jiminy Cricket to Donald Trump. I'm sorry, but you are now. And you could whisper in his ear. And for a day, you have the ability to create a new policy moving forward that can, inshallah, in some way, shape, or form, rupture the status quo, which leads to forever wars and actually lead to something that resembles normalcy and security. What would you recommend as a new policy moving forward? Because you are conservative, they do listen to you, and they know that you represent the youth.
I mean, okay, specific policy that's going to helm in Mr. Trump?
Well, no. I'm talking about because right now Trump is the president, but it could be a Democratic president, right? Let's just say. Let's say it's a Democratic president 2028. Same thing as we've seen. It's the bipartisan problem lasting 40 plus years. Something that you would say, you know what? I can influence you. Let me influence you. This is what you can change right now to end forever wars.
Oh, okay. I don't think we need a new policy. I think it's in the Constitution. The Senate should declare war. And if we go to war, the president should take his or her case to the American people, and it should get Senate approval, or they should be the ones that initiate the decision to go to war. It's very simple. And this was litigated under Obama. Obama waffled back and forth on whether or not to intervene in Syria. We were intervening surreptitiously on the various sides through intelligence. He decided he didn't really want to intervene, and so he kicked it to the Senate, which basically voted it down. I think that was basically elliptically appropriate. But in general, like, why did Donald Trump not bring this to the Senate? Because they wouldn't have approved it.
Narges, this is your book coming out in 2028. Give us hope. Are we destined to forever be mired in forever wars in the Middle East? Or can we break it?
The strength of the defense lobby is so strong. I don't know if we will be destined forever in forever wars in the Middle East, but I do think that we are destined for forever wars. Now, the geography of that might change. I got goosebumps on the second day of the Trump administration last year when he signed an executive order basically naming the drug cartels in Latin America foreign terrorist organizations. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was at a border expo for the research for this book because I'm looking at how, part of, when the Middle East is a workshop of warfare, that it's not a sealed laboratory. What a workshop is that's where you test your weapons. That's where you test your surveillance technologies. And then once you've perfected that, it goes on industry and you begin to sell it in different parts of the world. And so at this expo on the border, the entire conversation was, and the border czar said this, that the new global war on terror is on the southwest border of the United States and Mexico. And so what is happening now is that the entire sanctions architecture is moving into the southwest border of the United States and Mexico. All of the weaponry, there was a lot of Israeli firms and companies that were present at this expo selling their drones and anti-drone technologies, their surveillance technologies. Again, what is perfected and tested primarily on Palestinians, then utilized on Lebanese, and then tested at scale on Iranians and Iraqis, then gets transported to different arenas around the world. This is why you also see in police stations in the United States, a lot of the surveillance technologies, a lot of, importantly, ICE is using counterinsurgency, basically manuals that were developed for counterinsurgency purposes in the Iraq war are being utilized in Minnesota, are being utilized in Chicago. So when I say that the Middle East is a workshop of war, it's not that, are we going to end these wars today or tomorrow? It's that Palestinians are first and foremost the people that all of these kinds of technologies are used on. And then it spreads once they want to go on scale. You mentioned AI warfare. AI warfare, after it was tested on Gaza, it was tested on Lebanon, but they wanted to see, can it be used on scale? And so they needed to test it on a big country. That's where Iran came in. Once those tests are confirmed, then it becomes sort of, and this is what the Israeli companies say, they say that our technology is battle tested. And then once it's battle tested, it can be sold to the United States, it can be sold to Mexico, and as many of those in the Border Expo were saying, now this war is coming to the interior of the United States. So it's not like the boomerang of past generations where there was an imperial boomerang, what happened abroad eventually came back. What is now happening is an imperial cluster bomb. It is happening at all places simultaneously. All of the technology that we are now using in the Middle East, in the border, is now starting to come into the interior of the country as well.
And if you want to see the imperial cluster bomb, just follow Palantir and the contracts. Olivia, you literally have spent your entire year in counterterrorism, national security to protect Americans. You first supported the war on terror, and then you've come around and said it's a disaster. So you have a very unique perspective. You've seen both sides of the aisle. How can we stop forever wars? What can change in our policy, in our approach with our military industrial complex, with Israel, with Sunni client states? What can we do, any administration, Democratic or Republican, that can ensure we do not repeat this Groundhog's Day from hell?
Hello, this is working? Okay. Don't worry, I'm sure some entity will cut me off in a second. Foreign power. I think one of the things that I've actually really been frustrated with is I would say, the way we approach our foreign diplomacy and our engagement. I think for me, it's been strategically. I think it was one of Biden's biggest failures. All right, don't get upset with me. For some of you, but I think that.
I don't think anyone here will.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's a very divided country, but I do think that I do not. I don't understand why we don't engage in the regions that we're engaging with more. Right now, I'm looking at Donald Trump and what's happening here, and I'm like, why are we going to Pakistan in the aftermath after you've already launched the bombs with this problem? Why was there not a serious conversation about this is what I'm planning to do? I mean, granted, it's Donald Trump, so he has no control and he's a petulant child. So it was never going to go work for him, right? But I think we need to really start to take a step back as a United States and realize that as a superpower, which I would say right now, the way the world is looking at us is a complete decline. I don't know that the world really views us that way right now because of everything that we're doing. I think when you see coalitions around the world that are having meetings and excluding us and banning against us, I think we have a very serious problem. And so I think, number one, whoever comes into office next, whether it's Republican or Democrat, I think that's number one, the issue that I think we need to address full stop immediately out of the gate, as how we're going to gain trust to really have serious conversations that are going to unite some of these countries in the region. And I think it is actual diplomacy. And I'm not saying diplomacy slow rolling, slow walking into it like Biden did. I think you really have to have a more aggressive posture so that when you are doing these regional agreements, you are actually holding people's feet to the fire without having to engage in these ongoing wars. I think right now, you have all of us in this room because many of us have been deployed. I know Joe's been deployed. People have served overseas and seen it. And I can only speak for myself, but when you serve and you see this and you see war firsthand, it really changes you. I do believe. And so I think that you have these people who understand the role of diplomacy. I think there is a reason that people always say that is the first step. But it can't be diplomacy of sanction after sanction after sanction, and that's what we're doing, which is okay, slap another sanction on it. No, it really is about maybe perhaps a more regional approach and true conversations about maybe empowering other neighbors to have those conversations and maybe not just relying on one ally in the region, which I think has been the history, unfortunately, for this country. And I'm saying that just very honestly and openly about what I think we need to shift in terms of whoever is going to lead our country in the next moment.
Let's do Q&A. Let's take 2 questions. You were the first one up, so you win. I go to you first. I could repeat it as well.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
My question is, first of all, thank you for all of you. My question from Olivia, because in the series of talk you made, you talking about nation building, civil society building, because from the beginning of the Afghanistan, all coming through civil building, nation building. Don't you think this type of thinking has to be headed in order to stopping the war? Because who gives this right to American to go everywhere making nation building? Those old civilization there, and you are thinking, in my opinion, which is imperial thinking, to go and teach them how to live. If they are not looks like me, then they have to be changed.
Hold it 1 second, and we'll take a question from here. Sir, in the middle. Yes, with the very good trimmed beard. Excellent.
Hi, everyone. My name is Samad Sadri. Since you mentioned the war in Afghanistan, my question is for Olivia. The war in Afghanistan was a direct response to 9/11 attacks. And the goal was to topple the Taliban regime and get rid of Al-Qaeda. But after happening that, the Taliban were gone, Al-Qaeda was pushed out of Afghanistan, the war kept going on and on and on. The situation got worse, the mission changed to nation building. In your experience, at what point the US should have stopped engaging in Afghanistan, saying that this is enough, we have achieved our goals, and now we are going to leave before Afghanistan gets worse and we have to leave it back to the same regime that we toppled in the first place?
All right, we'll do those 2, then we'll do 2 after. Olivia.
Yeah, I think that was where I was going with my comments earlier, is that I think the United States always goes into this and like we're free the world kind of perspective, right? We're going to bring democracy. We're going to spread it. These are the conversations that I heard people like Condoleezza Rice said. I heard Dick Cheney. I've heard it all across the board. I remember Henry Kissinger. I worked for his protege, which is Paul Bremer. And I think the thing that I kept seeing along the way when you go back to look at case studies is that we're really good at saying, okay, we're going to do the civil engagement and we're going to set up and we're going to have all these like the Coalition Provisional Authority back in the day, and all these offices are going to be in part of this. I think I'm giving Joe like PTSD right now. He's watching me, I know, and he was probably deployed as a soldier during that time. So, but I think the issue is that your question about Afghanistan, I think, kind of merges with this, is that when you don't have maybe perhaps fully the support of the hearts and minds of people, and you go in, you don't actually understand the culture of the people. And then you have the military on the ground. And I actually think that there's sometimes a disconnect between the diplomats and the military and the people on the ground that are actually operationally on the ground, listening to what they're living and hearing, who actually have the true intelligence of what is happening in the society that doesn't feed all the way up, because you have these people that have actually never really been in these countries to experience a culture, who understand what is happening, who understand the region, who are the ones maybe calling the shots because they have certain ideology. See, I told you they were going to cut me off. So I think that is fundamentally the problem that I see repeating itself over and over again, is that we go in and then we say, okay, let's form a government, and we're going to form it in the way that the United States views the way government should be and run. And fundamentally, that's not how it works in other countries. It's not. You have to figure out where the will is, how that country responds to, which is why it didn't work with Iraq, right? We did the de-Baathification, and then we took out the police, which was a very strategically inept move. Like, all of these things that we did wrong then, you would think that there would be someone taking the lessons from each step along the way, but we keep wanting to repeat it. And so in the case of Afghanistan, I'm heartbroken to see how that exit took place. I'm heartbroken, very personally heartbroken about the people who were like protecting us on the ground, who are, a lot of these interpreters are stuck there now and their lives are being put at risk. And the women, I think about Afghan women who I met along the way and who are living in this situation again. And so I think the question for that is, I think the way we go about it at the onset is going to set the tone for the people of, again, it gets back to diplomacy. And I don't have a good response for you of when we should have handed a country back over there. What I will say is that we were there way too long. And I think that we keep experimenting with this. We go in and, we bomb and we engage, and yes, we should be anti-terrorism and we should be taking out the bad guys, absolutely. But when you're doing that, you have to be understanding, what are you building in the coalitions and in the government to really empower them to engage their own people? And what are you doing to empower the people on the ground? Because they're the ones that are left holding the bag in the end. When the United States come in and we leave, we're leaving them for the day after, right? I mean, we're seeing that. I mean, look at Venezuela right now. What is coming for them? What will happen with Cuba? And I mean, I'm so glad that you actually brought up the refugee problem, because it is counterintuitive to Stephen Miller, who does not want any of these people coming here, but yet we are perpetuating these crises, and we are creating a refugee crisis that we are going to continue to promulgate by the way that they are doing things. And so it's very curious to see an administration behave in such a way currently when you know that the last thing he wants is any of these people coming here. So yeah, so I mean, it is something that I think we should continue to figure out, but I think it basically gets back to the premise of why we shouldn't be engaging in this manner to begin with, because we leave things and in the aftermath it leads to years of devastation, lives being lost, and no accountability.
We'll do, we're going to go, before I bring on Emily, Joe, and Trita, I want to do two final questions, one for Curt, one for Professor Narges. Who has a question for Curt? All the way back, sir.
Well, here we go. Thank you very much. You alluded to something earlier, Olivia.
I got to get a question for Curt. Yeah.
No, here we go.
I got you.
All right, Curt. One of the issues that was alluded to earlier was about the fact that in the earlier Trump administration, there was probably more, for lack of a better term, guardrails, right? And we know that in this administration, there are far less, if any. One of the things I want to ask about is competence. Having worked in an agency in the intelligence community as well as in the military, one of the things I recognize is that the competence of the certain cadre of professionals was being evacuated in this administration. A lot of those people were either leaving, either voluntarily, a lot of them not voluntarily. And now we have a longer game issue about how do we rebuild the level of competence that is needed. It's not just a policy question for this administration. I think the policies are there. The strategies are there.
Got it.
Right?
Thank you, sir. Awesome.
What about the?
I got you. And we'll do one final question for Professor Narges. In the back. I see you in the back.
So my question is, US conducted its nuclear test back in 1991. It's been over 34 years. Many people have retired. I mean, unfortunately passed away. So in order to conduct a nuclear test, I mean, even if they do, it's going to take a lot of training, a lot of this and that. But why don't we just wait for them to actually test it first before we actually, overreact or something? Because it takes a lot of time to do that. And yeah.
Okay. First one is about competence. We have a lack of trust. We also have a lack of competence. Curt, how do you rebuild competence to get to a situation where we can have competent foreign policy?
All right, so this is a very enormous question, and I'll try to answer it very, very, very quickly. So I actually will put forward that a counterintuitive thesis that with a president like this, and he's the duly elected president of the United States. Personnel has been overrated. Like, it doesn't actually matter who's in the administration. If the president of the United States wants to listen to Fox News hosts, to donors who are potentially more loyal to foreign countries, there are no guardrails for that in our current system, right? I mean, we have an imperial presidency. This is the consequence of it. As to the ideology versus competence question, there are people that I agree with who are incompetent, and there are people who are competent who I don't agree with. So in the first term, as referenced, I don't really agree with Jim Mattis. I don't really agree with John Kelly. I don't agree with John Bolton, certainly, or H.R. McMaster.
You
But
don't
these-
agree with bomb Iran?
No, but these are, quote, and I hate the term, but they are serious people, some real heft. And what has been different now is that you have throughout the administration a tendency for people with less experience and more likely to be ultra deferential and or irrelevant vis-a-vis the president. And it's super unfortunate. I do think it matters, though, that, as I answered before, I think we should take this out of just being one person's decision. I think we need to reassert Congress's role, even though on some days it feels like Congress doesn't want its own role to make war and peace. That's the only structural change we can make. Because if we worship credentials, and I think this is more of a problem on the Democratic, capital D, side than the Republican side, these so-called experts, you mentioned Paul Bremer, the protege of Henry Kissinger. Paul Bremer was the occupier in Iraq. Iraq did not go well. So we shouldn't have tests or rules. We should elect the right person, and we don't elect the right person. There should be more safeguards within the system. Thank you.
Final word to Professor Narges.
Netanyahu has been saying for years, decades, that Iran is just a few months away from a bomb. All U.S. intel has confirmed over and over again that that is just not true. If you zoom out from the Iran case, what you see over and over throughout the Middle East is that in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya, including North Africa, Israel has taken steps to dismantle these countries, to create failed states, because the objective is not about whether there is an actual nuclear program or not. The objective is a much, much deeper one, which is that Israel wants failed states. It wants collapsed societies around the region, because that is the only way that Israel can create the Greater Israel Project. That is the only way that a small settler colonial piece of land and society can create a much larger colonial entity and take over more territory in the region, is if you have states that are collapsed and societies that are in chaos. That is what these wars are about. It is not about any one state's particular nuclear program or weapons program or not.
Give it up, Curt, Olivia, Narges. Folks, I was not lying when I said we have goated panels. That alone could have been the evening. We have 2 more panels. It is awesome. I'm going to give them a round of applause again, folks. Fantastic. I'm going to introduce the next panel, moderating the next panel. Emily Jashinsky. She's the co-host of like 46 shows. She's the co-host of Breaking Point. She's the host of After Party with Emily. She's the host of Megyn Kelly's wrap-up show. And when she's not hosting 45 shows, she's a columnist over at Unheard. We also have Joe Kent, American politician, former United States Army warrant officer, former CIA paramilitary officer who served as director of National Counterterrorism Center from 2025 to 2026. He also resigned as director of the National Counterterrorism Center, citing disagreement over U.S. involvement in the Iran war and the influence of Israel and the Israeli lobby in domestic politics. And we have Trita Parsi, Iranian-Swedish international relations writer, political analyst, who has clearly packed the crowd with his family and friends. Co-founder and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Give him a round of applause.
Thank you. All right, blessed are the peacemakers. How about that? Now, it's an honor to be here among so many people committed to the cause of peace. Thank you. Thank you for putting this together. And what a great panel we have right now. What a great panel we just heard from. Lots of energy in this room, too. I love that. Love that. So appreciate everybody for being here. Appreciate everybody who made this happen. And actually, in honor of Professor Pape, Joe, I'm going to put you in the hot seat first. Will Donald Trump escalate? Will he escalate? You know the man. There is a trap, dare I say. And right now we've heard Mark Levin and others saying sanctions relief, unacceptable. Unfreezing of assets, unacceptable. So does Donald Trump at some point have to rebuke the Mark Levin perspective, or does he have to escalate? What do you think?
Well, first and foremost, I want to remind, hopefully, President Trump that he doesn't have to do anything he doesn't want to do. He's the commander in chief. I hope he wakes up and remembers that and says, I've gotten really bad advice that's gotten me into this trap. Because right now, as the conditions are currently set, he basically has to escalate. The Israelis backed us into a corner here, as I'm sure we'll get into more. But the Israelis are really smart and forward-leaning. They wanted us into this war. They knew this war eventually would become unpopular. So the first thing they got us on board with doing was killing the supreme leader and then killing off several of the moderates who we should be negotiating with. And so now, even if he wants to negotiate, he wants to get a deal. Number one, the Iranians don't trust us because we already bombed them twice during negotiations. But also, we killed a lot of the guys who we should be negotiating with. We've emboldened the hardliners who for years have been saying, like, don't negotiate with the Americans. We basically proved their case for them. So this is why I have been advocating for, and I know there's people in the room who may feel differently. I've been advocating for President Trump flipping the table and saying, I don't agree with this card game. It's rigged. I'm going to leave. We pull our troops out. That avoids the escalation. We restrain the Israelis, and then we get back to the negotiating table. We have to get rid of the poison pills of zero enrichment, hand over uranium. If we could get past all of that, President Trump then, it is my belief that President Trump then could get a historic deal, and he could go down as a peacemaker.
Trita, do you agree with Joe? Do you think that's a plausible path?
Absolutely. With all of the different criticisms, and there's plenty of them that would be valid against Trump, he does have the ability to make these 180s. In fact, he does them all the time. It's part of the problem with him. But on this one in particular, I think there's a couple of factors that we should take into account that really makes him very different. One is he does not have that type of attachment to the sanctions that have been put in place in Iran for such a long time now, more than 4 decades. In previous negotiations, both the Obama administration and Biden, certainly with Biden, there was a greater love for the sanctions than there was a love or a pursuit of the deal. And as a result, there was like this attachment to this supposed leverage, but an unwillingness to actually cash it in by using it as leverage to get a deal. Trump does not seem to have this problem. In fact, if you go back to 2015, when he was running the first time and he kept on saying that this is the worst deal ever, talking about the JCPOA, what was often not mentioned was the sentences afterwards, in which he specified why he thought it was the worst deal ever. And he kept on saying it's unfair to the US because it only lifted sanctions on European and Asian countries, but did not allow American companies to go into Iran. That's because the Obama administration did not lift the primary sanctions, only secondary sanctions. So American companies did not benefit from the JCPOA. Later on, the people who had to brief Trump after he won the elections on Iran were shocked to find out that he hated Iran and the JCPOA for all the wrong reasons. And they needed to essentially re-educate him to understand why he was supposed to be so anti this deal or anti the country. So no, I do think that there is that possibility. And there's also a potential unique window just in the next couple of months because Trump, first of all, Netanyahu, obviously the Israelis will try to do everything they can to prevent the deal. But right now, the Israelis are about to go into their election season. Netanyahu is trying to postpone it over and over again, but now there's a firm deadline. Before October, it has to happen. he has not managed to translate the support for the war that exists in Israeli society, sadly, to a political win for him. And at the same time, Trump is very popular in Israel. If he, under these circumstances, strikes a deal and then Netanyahu tries to attack Trump, it will be political suicide for him. He cannot go up against Trump in the midst of an election season right now. And note what Trump was saying just a day or 2 days ago. Out of nowhere, he suddenly said, I'm very popular in Israel. If I were to run in Israel, I could win any election. I could get to any seat. I think that was a warning shot to the Israelis, essentially making it clear, if I go down this path, because they're in a very sensitive stage in the negotiations, and you come against me, I can be a kingmaker in the Israeli elections, and certainly could. I mean, if Netanyahu does something, he can go out and endorse Naftali Bennett. Not that it's much of a difference in my view, but nevertheless, it would put an end to Netanyahu's political career, which means that he likely would end up in jail pretty soon. That's a very unique vulnerability that Netanyahu has just for the next couple of weeks and months that will not exist after October.
That is so interesting. And Joe, people are probably familiar with your resignation story, but this path depends on people being able to convince Trump that there is another way. He is the president of the United States. Could you describe a bit from the inside what the forces working against that happening, the people in the president's ear who don't want that to happen, what are those like inside right now?
I'd say, unfortunately, the intelligence community in the first Trump administration didn't do themselves any favors with the Russia collusion, et cetera. So the president was skeptical of the intelligence community, even when he was actually on this topic that a lot of us were deeply steeped in. The intelligence community was accurate. He was more inclined to listen to the Israelis. And again, the echo chamber I described in my resignation letter, it's very impressive and it's very all-encompassing. So you get the official engagement from Netanyahu and other members of the Israeli cabinet, prominent Israelis who will go officially to President Trump or members of the cabinet. That's how they circumvent the intelligence process, because they'll say, hey, here's some information that it hasn't hit intelligence channels yet, because they know if they put it in through standard liaison channels that it would kind of get debunked. So they're able to short circuit the process that way. But then also they have the entire media ecosystem that they know the president is consuming. Fox News, I mean, Curt said it perfectly. When you've got Mark Levin and other folks who have more access than the experts that should have access, he's listening to them, but he's hearing the same thing. And so then he's getting confirmation bias, not realizing they're all basically coordinating their message. That's how they were able to move the red line from no nuclear weapon to zero enrichment, which is a poison pill in negotiations.
And also that regime change was likely, right?
Regime change too. Yeah, and the regime change, the Israelis did, they did a very effective job in January when there was protesters on the streets in Iran. The Israelis came and they said, look how easy it's going to be. We can do a regime change here. It will be just like Venezuela. That's where the whole Ahmadinejad thing came in. I don't think that was ever very serious, but I think they said, hey, this potentially could be, like what you did in Venezuela. So if the president keeps the really tight circle that he has right now, I think he's going to hear, hey, you just have to double and triple down. There's going to be the pressure from Miriam Adelson and all the other donors, of course. But if he opens up who he's talking to, and I think I am hoping that he takes an honest assessment of the advice he's gotten so far on the diplomatic track, the military track, and sees that he's in a hard spot, he does do something like just simply walk away.
I have a quick but obvious follow-up to that for you, Joe. Breaking news today, of course, that your friend, your former colleague, Tulsi Gabbard, is resigning from her post at ODNI. Well, so, I was actually going to ask this by saying I have the opposite perspective of a lot of brothers and sisters in the anti-war cause, which is that Trump's circle is getting so small.
Yes.
And the departure of DNI Gabbard frightens me a bit, Joe, because I know there's all kinds of reporting that she and you had maybe been cut out of the process of getting information, good information, to the president's desk. Another resignation that doesn't seem to have made enough waves so far is Amaryllis Fox Kennedy. That's happening? So should we be concerned that the president, with the departure of DNI Gabbard, is going to have even less valid information getting to his desk?
Yes, I mean, he needs to have more diversity of opinions coming to him. And so obviously the DNI leaving, Tulsi Gabbard leaving, is going to be a big loss. So I hope they can balance that out with some more perspectives. And again, but I think Trump is a results-oriented guy. If he looks at the results he's gotten so far, this is not what he was sold just a couple months ago. And so that should encourage him to look for other voices.
Very interesting. Trita, there's so many directions we could go in here, but I want to stick on this question of intelligence because there's been some very deep New York Times reporting, the Jonathan Swan, Maggie Haberman story that was a really blockbuster piece of journalism when it came out. What role do you think the kind of typical deep state intelligence, Iraq war style manufacturing of bad information played in convincing the president, and maybe still convincing the president now, to make the decision that he made on February 28th?
This is a better question for Joe, who was there on the inside. Let me just tell you what I could see from the outside, and Joe, you correct me. I thought, first of all, during the initial stages of the protest, around December 28th, there was such a disconnect between what I heard from people inside of Iran was happening and what I saw in the news, in which the media narrative immediately went to thinking, oh, is the regime about to collapse? And presented the protests at the time as being massive. At the time, they were not massive at all. They became massive much later on. But the news reporting seemed to be like 2 weeks ahead of actual realities.
That's interesting.
And that to me, I can't say that I can prove it, but it really seemed to have, at least partially have been driven by the desire to really convince Trump this is going to be easy. Because I think if you're going with the task of convincing someone who has given, as Curt pointed out, a very, very significant promise of not starting new wars, who does seem to have an instinct to go in that direction, but at the same time has impulses that goes in all kinds of directions, but nevertheless, an instinct that nevertheless is there some way, somehow. You may see a pattern in which the easiest way or the only way to convince someone like that to do something like this is simply by convincing him that it's easy. Because it's easy, then he's not against it in the same way. He's against it because, not because of immoral reasons or because of broader geopolitical considerations, but because it's proven to be so difficult in the past, and he doesn't want to repeat the same mistakes of others. But if you can convince him that it's easy by portraying the regime in Iran, the government in Iran, on being on perpetual risk of collapsing in turn, or just point out that this is no different from Gaddafi's Libya or Iraq's under Saddam. You take out the top person or his children, and the whole thing collapses or implodes internally. If you can convince him of these different things, then you can suddenly get him to go in a direction that otherwise seems to be quite the opposite of what he has been saying. So at least on the public sphere, it seemed like there was a very concerted effort to bring about that perception. Let me point out one last point, though. I think the Iranians also did something that actually reinforced Trump's perception of them as being very weak. And that was the refusal of the Iranians to talk directly to Trump. He had clearly shown himself to be willing to talk to anyone. I mean, he came in and he wanted to be buddies with Kim Jong-un, and then later on brought, the founder of Al-Qaeda into the White House. I mean, he wants to talk to everyone. And he actually broke a lot of taboos in the United States in Washington, because a lot of presidents came in and are terrified of talking to various world leaders. And in that sense, I think it's very good. He broke those taboos. And he did so because he's like, I can do this because I'm strong. I'm so much stronger than all the previous presidents. But the invert of that is that when someone else refuses to talk to you, and the Iranians thought that they were actually doing it from a position of strength, they were refusing to talk to the superpower. They showed how strong they were. I think he just interpreted that as a validation of how weak they were, because they didn't have the confidence to have that direct conversation with them. And it just reinforced what the Israelis were portraying about the Iranians.
And so, Joe, give us your assessment of what Dr. Parsi just laid out. And also, I want to ask about the role that Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff have played. We'll put the ethical questions aside, or maybe you see them as part of them, just in terms of how the Iranians responded to this negotiating team coming in with all of their real estate development expertise. Has that been a mistake from the Trump administration?
So initially, prior to the 12-day war, I believe that Witkoff was on the cusp of getting a deal.
Mhm.
And that's because the issue of enrichment, that red line hadn't been moved yet, that goalpost hadn't been shifted. Witkoff went to sit down with the Iranians under the assumption that President Trump said, hey, Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, which you'll still hear President Trump come back and say again over and over. But then usually later on, they'll come and they'll clean it back up and they'll say, we mean no enrichment. Or they'll press him again. He'll get painted back into this corner of zero enrichment. That wasn't the original guidance. And so I think initially when we came in, the Iranians were negotiating on a good faith. And I believe that we were too for at least the first few months of the administration. Because you can even go back and look when Steve Witkoff was on Fox News or the Sunday shows, he was talking about levels of enrichment, how it would be monitored. It was almost like they were really kind of in some positive trade space heading towards the deal. That's when the Israeli lobby freaked out. And that's when we saw the Israelis come in their official capacity with their surrogates in the media. We started getting bombarded by the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. And that's when we basically had the red line moved. And it was zero enrichment. No enrichment is acceptable. And then I think after the 12-day war and Midnight Hammer, we tried to get back to the negotiating table. Again, the Iranians, once again, we're back at the negotiating table. But the second time around, I just don't think Witkoff or Kushner, even if Witkoff and Kushner didn't have any ties to the Trump family, even if they weren't real estate people, I just don't think those two diplomats would have the credibility to go sit back down with the Iranians.
Sure. Trita, how bad, I mean, this is a question I'm going to give to both of you, but let's say hypothetically there's a glide path out of this quagmire, to borrow a word, and Trump chooses the path that both of you have laid out. Let's just say hypothetically, we've waved a magic wand and that's happened. How bad is the damage that has been done to America as a geopolitical force already, however many, what are we, 2.5 months into this war right now?
Oh, I mean, it is immense. The credibility loss, but here this goes even beyond that. And some of that actually may have a silver lining. I'm not rooting for the US to lose, but I think the impact of this war is going to have grand strategic implications that go far beyond what the impact of the disaster in Iraq did. In Iraq, the United States won the war militarily within 3 weeks. There was no question about it. The political objective of getting rid of Saddam Hussein was achieved as well. It's everything else that followed afterwards that, of course, was the problem, and an ability to be able to stabilize the country, deal with insurgency, the thought that the U.S. can go and just, govern another country when we had like 3% of the folks on the ground that actually spoke Arabic. It's that type of arrogance that created that problem. In the Iran situation, the United States has not won this militarily. In fact, strategically, it has lost this. The political objective of getting rid of the regime, the last name of the supreme leader has not even changed. So, this has achieved none of these things. And on top of that, you're seeing how the Iranians, very effectively using geography, have managed to actually have escalation dominance over the United States, the superpower. And this is not unique to the Strait of Hormuz. This can be replicated in other geographies as well. And that then raises deep questions. If the United States cannot have escalation dominance in the Persian Gulf against a country like Iran, whose military budget is like, 2% of that of the United States, then what does that mean for America's ability to pursue global hegemony as part of the grand strategy of liberal hegemony, in which the United States is supposed to be able to fight 2 major wars in 2 different continents simultaneously? I think this is just destroyed the credibility that the US has that capacity. And that then raises question marks that already existed in many countries' minds, but now is going to be dramatically strengthened. Can you rely on the American security umbrella, given this track record? That was not a question mark that came after the disasters in Iraq or Afghanistan. So this is going to have implications that go way beyond that. Now, just as a parenthesis, I think it's a very good thing if we don't pursue liberal hegemony or hegemony globally. That's actually very good for the United States. It just shouldn't happen this way.
Picking up on Trita's point, do you see this as already a strategic loss, Joe?
I mean, certainly, like if you just look at our bases in the region that were the security guarantees that held together the GCC, the petrodollar, we've shown that with very little technology, the Iranians can shut down the Straits of Hormuz. Our bases in the region, those basically became strategic liabilities, not assets. So militarily, it's lost. And obviously, if we could flip that around and we could militarily win, Trump would do it tonight, or we would have done it at the beginning of this. And so we're still in this weird phase where just globally, I think we have this amazing military that can go and do very, very brilliant tactical things, but we still haven't gotten it through our heads somehow that brilliant tactical operation that we pull off, it doesn't equal strategic success, especially when you don't state what your strategic goal is and plan accordingly. And we just simply didn't do that in this case. We never got a clear, coherent, we're going to do this military operation to achieve this effect. We would get a laundry list of things that we had bombed and people we had killed, but then we would say, well, it's also not a regime change, and we don't quite know what we want, other than for them to reopen the Straits of Hormuz and to totally surrender. So we're kind of stuck in this phase right now. And I think the sooner that we can be honest about that with ourselves, then we can start to work our way out of it.
Curt Mills on the last panel brought up, he was asked about the anti-war right. And he brought up, I think, a very important point, which was that in Kentucky 4 this week, 45% of voters, heavily young voters, went with Thomas Massie over a man whose name we needn't repeat because you needn't remember it. Can Donald Trump crush? Let me just put it this way. He defines MAGA. We've learned that over and over again. We don't need any more lessons in it, particularly. Donald Trump is the person who defines MAGA. Can he crush this anti-war movement that has a lot of momentum right now in the conservative movement on the right? By the time he leaves, is it possible that will have been squelched, or do you see it growing?
I think President Trump can be effective right now in a primary while he's still the commander in chief ahead of the midterms. If you just look at the demographics that Curt pointed out, I mean, it was basically just the boomers that voted for Massie's opponent. So anybody who wants to have a political future in this movement, which President Trump doesn't have to worry about, he can't run again. So, but if you want to have a political future in this movement, you can just read the data. And even if you fundamentally are a neocon and you think any minute now, we're going to find the Thomas Jefferson in Iran and everything's going to be fine after we bomb enough of them, whatever. It's just the data doesn't support it. So I think he's doing as much as he can right now with the power that he has. I think after the midterms, you're going to see a lot of Republicans start to distance themselves from President Trump because they're going to start thinking about a post-Trump world and what and what that means. And so if you look at the data, the more restrained foreign policy, ending the wars in the Middle East, and reassessing our relationship with Israel, and then foreign aid in general, it's going to be really hard, I think, to win Republican primaries going forward with just your standard, kitchen sink Fox News views that Massie's opponent had.
Mark Levin, not a winning messenger. Okay. Trita, you talk to people on the left, you talk to people on the right. I'm curious, as we stick on the right here for a moment, have you been surprised? Maybe you expected it because you've talked to the right for a long time, but have you been surprised by the response that from the right, some segment of the right? I mean, when I saw you, I obviously worked for Megyn Kelly. When I saw Megyn interviewing you, I thought, wow, the Overton window has shifted. Have you been surprised by this?
Actually, I haven't. The anti-war sentiments on the right have always been there. What I think is happening now is that they've grown stronger to any sense of loyalty to Trump. And we're starting to see the small first evidence of that, certainly amongst the young people. But when you take a look at it, I don't find it surprising, because where do the majority of the American soldiers who served in these completely idiotic and needless forever wars come from?
Mm-hmm.
They're not coming from Brooklyn, where they voted for Mamdani. The majority of them are coming from red districts, and that's where the soldiers are coming home, either in coffins, without limbs, with PTSD, committing suicide. So this is just a natural phenomenon in which they have seen the realities, the consequences of these wars more closely, perhaps, than other parts of the country. And the reaction to it is exactly a logical and natural reaction. And eventually this slipped into the politics on the right, ironically through Donald Trump, who was channeling this at a time when no one else except for Ron Paul was willing to do it on the American right. And it was happening on the American left as well with Bernie. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for him vis-a-vis Hillary. But nevertheless, so I don't think we should be surprised by that in any way, shape, or form. It's what can we do now when there is that type of convergence, both on the left and the right, against this type of a foreign policy, these endless wars, this hegemonic pursuit of empire, and make sure that all other types of differences, all legitimate differences, can at least be set aside so that we can work together in a mature way to make sure that we save the country from the ills of empire and these endless wars.
And Trita, I'm so glad you brought that up because, Joe, I really wanted to ask you, as someone of your life experiences, someone who served, someone whose late wife served, if we could step back and you could maybe walk us through, given all of that, what it's been like to watch you, or for you to watch the country find its way in another war. What have you heard from other veterans? What has that been like for you personally?
For me personally, it's been infuriating. I mean, I really supported what President Trump stood for in 2016, what he campaigned on in 2024, what he attempted, even though it wasn't perfect, what he attempted to do in his first administration. And so I thought we truly were going to do the thing. We were going to keep our country safe without getting into other wars. And then watching basically the Israeli lobby and the neocons, all the neocons who hated President Trump's guts, who tried to keep a lot of us out of the administration, come in and influence him into something just so idiotic. It's very, very frustrating. And then as we started taking losses, we've lost 13 service members there. It broke my heart that this was happening again. It's a big reason why I had to leave, because I just couldn't be part of it morally. And I get the same sentiment from veterans. There is a mixed bag with global war on terror veterans. There is a narrative out there, and there's a lot of truth to this. The Iranians, the Quds Force, they did support a lot of the Iraqi insurgents. We shouldn't have been there in the first place, but they did inflict a lot of casualties against us. And so a lot of them are saying this is vengeance for what they did to us inside of Iraq. To that, I say, look, I personally believe that President Trump already solved this equation. He killed Qasem Soleimani. He killed Abu Mahdi Mohandas. He got vengeance for those actions right there. And then he prevented us from getting into a regime change war in Iran, because in his first administration, he understood a regime change war in Iran was an absolute fool's errand. So to watch him actually thread that needle so precisely and just so intelligently in the first administration, and then to see him slide back into this, and now we're just getting fed war propaganda again. And a lot of patriotic young Americans are falling for it. They're saying we have to go do this. We have to do the regime change war. And again, to what end and what benefit is that to the American people? And so it's just, it's frustrating, but at the same time, I do get a lot of hope from the younger people who aren't falling for the war propaganda. And just again, if we just look at the breakdown, I think we're trending in the right direction.
One more follow-up on that. I know some people in this room probably encountered Secretary Hegseth over the years, now Secretary Hegseth over the years, who worked for groups that were smeared as anti-war, as though that's a smear, or anti-interventionist, as though that's a smear. Has it been odd for you to watch people like Pete Hegseth and others in the administration be so pedal to the metal, gung-ho about this particular intervention?
It shocked me, yeah. Just to be honest, it really did. Because a lot of us were out there on the campaign trail at various capacities talking about why these wars were such a bad idea. And then for us to do but now we're in charge, so it's a good idea thing. I mean, look, power's intoxicating. I mean, having the full military and the full scope of the U.S. government at your fingertips, it's really intoxicating. And to create a bubble where no one is saying, hey, I think this might not be a good idea, is very challenging. It's interesting. After the Venezuela raid, I actually was over in Iraq, Jordan, and Syria, visiting our forces out there, and my capacity as the National Counterterrorism Center director. And I was speaking with some of our special operators who, they weren't on the Maduro raid, but they were from the unit that did the Maduro raid. And two of them pulled me aside and they said, hey, do you guys understand in Washington, D.C., that we just can't replicate this every time? Like, we got really, really freaking lucky here. And if we get asked to go do this in other places, it's not going to work. They have to understand that. But unfortunately, by the time push came to shove, there wasn't enough people in the room with President Trump to throw cold water on it and say, hey, sir, this could really, really go bad. Because I think a lot of them were just really intoxicated with the power that they wielded in these positions.
Trita, I have to ask, this is maybe an idealistic question, but what could America's future with Iran look like? Again, this is hypothetical. This is wave your magic wand style stuff. But I think a lot of people saw the pragmatism, and including Joe, both you and me, the pragmatism of Donald Trump as something that, it wasn't necessarily a given, but maybe it would be better than the status quo. But if we were to take a real sort of pragmatic, lowercase l liberal approach, what could America's future with Iran and the Iranian people look like?
Okay, it's really important to try to be optimistic, because you have to, you're not going to be successful in trying to change things unless you have a degree of irrational optimism. If you're entirely rational, you're not going to get very far. But on this one, I have to say, it's going to be really difficult because of what has happened here, obviously. But there is still a pathway forward. Look, if there is a deal between the United States and Iran, and I'm pretty confident that if there is a deal, it will be a larger deal, not a smaller deal. Because what Trump wants on the nuclear front has a much higher price. Combined with his willingness to actually lift sanctions, you can actually get something much, much bigger. If that were to happen, and you end up with a scenario in which this time around you actually do have sanctions relief on Iran for a longer period of time, not like the JCPOA in which Trump pulled the plug on it and was only there for 2 years. You're going to see an opportunity for the Iranian economy to grow and its middle class to grow that over the course of the next 5 to 10 years can have a profound impact on that society. And I do believe that had Trump not pulled the plug on the JCPOA, by now, Iran would have had one of the largest middle classes in the region. It would have grown significantly, and it would dramatically have strengthened the position of the society in Iran vis-a-vis the state. That would have brought about tensions within that system that would have forced it to move in a different direction than it has. Now it moved in the opposite direction. This can nevertheless happen again. And in that process, particularly if you have American companies on the ground in Iran, you have far greater degree of connectivity between Americans and Iranians. You can once again start forging a different future that is not forgetting the past, is not ignoring the past, but is nevertheless recognizing that there needs to be a better future for both sides. I still think it's absolutely possible. One small thing though, if that scenario happens, the first thing that will happen inside of Iran though is that the Iranian society is going to have to deal with a much, much more imminent open wound, which is what happened in Iran on January 8 and 9. And there is a significant gulf between the government and big parts of that society. And in some aspects, the government is in a rather privileged position right now that because of the war, it doesn't have to deal with that issue. Once the war is truly over, that issue will come back. And it's going to have to be dealt with. It's going to be an extremely, extremely difficult process for them. And I have no idea in which direction it will go. I do think, however, in the absence of sanctions relief, if you have the war end, but it's no deal, there's no sanctions relief, and then they deal with this issue, then you're very likely to see far more repression going forward, because that will be the only tool the government will have at its disposal.
Very important. And before questions, we'll take questions. All right, before we go to questions, get your questions ready. Joe, I wanted to ask you, I think one of the things that gets glossed over is there are people in Israel who do not want this. Obviously, public opinion in Israel is different, but there are people in Israel who don't want this. And I heard something, it was actually on Tucker Carlson's show. He said recently, if my family lived in Israel, I don't think they would be any safer because of what's happened over the last couple of months. And I wanted to put that question to you. Are the people of Israel, and maybe people who don't support the Netanyahu agenda, the Greater Israel Project, are they any safer if there is regime collapse in the Middle East? Are they any safer because of what's happened in this particular war?
No, I don't see a scenario in which they emerge from this safer. They've made immensely more enemies, obviously, from what happened, genocide in Gaza, from what's happening right now in Lebanon. The Iranians have shown they can reach them with the ballistic missiles, with the drones, and it's just a matter of time. And they've gone so all in on forcing us into this war that now you have a massive political coalition, we're all here in this room, that are building and they're voting and they're saying we don't want to give Israel as much aid. Well, Israel relies on us basically for pretty much everything in terms of their national defense. Like literally, Israel can't defend their skies that are now vulnerable to Iranian ballistic missiles and drones and from all the proxies without us, but that support is going to be pulled away because of the actions of the Likud government and the Benjamin Netanyahu government. I mean, Netanyahu and Likud, the guys that are in charge right now, they're completely okay with this war lasting perpetually, basically, and having complete and total chaos. They think there's space in the chaos for them to exploit. But part of that formula is the perpetuation of the conflict. They want the conflict to keep going, but that doesn't serve the security needs of the Israeli people, and it's going to make their security much more in a much worse spot, especially as we lose support, or they lose support from us politically. So this is a lose-lose for Israel as well, for people who care desperately about Israel.
And I do have one more question for Trita, which is, it would be foolish for us to act as though there is no problem, partially of our own creation, now with extremism in Iran. Has the last 2 months bolstered the people in Iran, the leadership, some people in leadership ranks in Iran, who do want to now accelerate, as our ally says they won't say whether they have nuclear weapons, and we won't say whether they have nuclear weapons, accelerate their own rush to nuclear weapons?
I think there's two aspects of this. On the one hand, does it lead to a stronger desire for nuclear weapons and moving in that direction? But also what is just happening inside of the segment of society that supports the current system. And let me start with the second part. The segment of society, just based on conversations I've had, it's anecdotal, but I think it is quite representative, and it's also reflected in what you see in the media in Iran. There is a new one confidence amongst the people who support the current system that didn't exist before. You have to remember that this system had increasingly lost almost every card of legitimacy it had. But one of the cards of legitimacy it had amongst its own supporters was that it had managed to keep the country safe and out of many of these different wars that had taken place in the region, up until just a couple of years ago. And then the performance, everything from what happened in Gaza to Iran's direct confrontation with Israel, were increasingly, even though there were strategic things that happened there, such as the Iranians showing that they could penetrate the Israeli skies, nevertheless, they had no control over their own skies. They were completely taken by surprise in June. Israel had a dramatic presence inside of the country, was firing drones from inside the territory of Iran. All of these things really just eroded that last leg of legitimacy that it had in the eyes of some of the system's own supporters. That now has just changed dramatically. Because now Iran, in their view, has strategically defeated 2 nuclear weapon states, one of them a superpower. And as a result, there's just a completely different attitude. Now, will that lead to them potentially overplaying their hands? Absolutely. Everyone is prone to that. And there is definitely an element inside of the system right now that is not opposed to Trump restarting the war. They believe that they dramatically increased and strengthened their negotiating position because of this war. And to a certain extent, they are right. And they believe that there is nothing the United States can do that dramatically changes the picture. Instead, if Trump is foolish enough to go into another war, it will further strengthen Iran's position. It still has the ability to define the geography of this war. It still has escalation dominance. And on top of that, this time around, they seem to really want to go after the UAE. A conviction they have that the Emiratis played a much bigger role in the initial war than they first thought, and make an example out of it, and put an end to any belief that there's any particular security value coming with signing the Abraham Accords. So there's definitely an element over there that in some ways wants this or welcomes this, but understands it can only happen if the US starts the war. It's a completely different equation if the Iranians restart the war. That will create problems with Russia, with China, with many other states. But if they're attacked once again, it gives them the opportunity, the excuse, the pretext, whatever you want to call it.
All right, I'm going to take a question for Trita and then a question for Joe. So first, a question for Trita. We have someone right behind you. Oh, perfect. That sounds great. Yes.
I thank you so much for this fantastic panel. This is for Trita. First of all, I think we should remember that Trump himself once said he wants Iranian oil. So there is another component to this. But my question to Trita is, it seems to be, and we're talking about escalation, but Iran has the Strait of Hormuz. It has now the cables under the sea, the internet. It has, as you said, a newfound confidence among the people. It really is interesting how people of different opinions are coming together, concerts at night on the street, things that in the media here doesn't pay attention to. So do you really see any potential for escalation for the United States under the current circumstances?
Thank you, Fatima. Great to see you again. You should ask that question of the escalation trap author over here, who probably will have a different answer than me. I do see yes, because irrational decisions are made constantly. But I would say something, and it's echoing what Joe said. If there was an easy option here, Trump would have used it a long time ago. I mean, look at all of the threats he made. He's going to take out their oil installations. And then when he did strike at Kharg Island, he made sure that he didn't touch the oil installations at all. Just really, really carefully avoided them. So there's a clear realization on his end what the tremendous, dangerous repercussions it would have if it goes in that direction. But could there be another scenario in which, once again, our friends at FDD managed to convince him of some dumb idea? I mean, the blockade of the blockade came from FDD. And I think, frankly, had Trump just gotten the ceasefire was disproportionately beneficial to the United States. Time would have been on the US's side in this standoff if there wasn't for the blockade of the blockade. But FDD managed to convince him to do the blockade of the blockade, and it dramatically damaged his own timeline and position. So yes, irrational decisions, unfortunately, are the norm, unfortunately.
Question for Joe Kent.
My question is, hello?
We got you.
I'm attempting to be Iraq. Assuming that scenario comes true and President Trump decides that we're just going to walk away, there's already been a tremendous amount of loss of credibility for the United States, which to me feels like a little bit of a moment where it feels like you can't kind of put the toothpaste back in the tube. So my question is, assuming best case scenario does come true, what would the United States do specifically and immediately to try to regain that credibility on the global stage?
So first and foremost, for any of it to even work, the first step is we have to restrain the Israelis. And we have to do it in a meaningful way. We can't just post something on social media or have a strongly worded letter. We actually have to start taking back some of the military support that we give to them. We could have prevented the entire 12-day war from happening, in my opinion, if we would have taken away enough of Israel's air defense so that they couldn't have gone on the offense. So they only had enough to defend themselves. We gave them the capability to have a little bit extra so they could go on the offense. If we start to take that away from them, and then we have to be very, very clear, but very firm, and just say, if you guys do anything that messes with this ceasefire, we are going to cut you off completely. I think that will start to restore some credibility. But then also pragmatically, I think, as Trita pointed out, the sanctions relief, this is a place where we actually have a lot of leverage with the Iranians. Because if we leave, the FDD crowd and the neocons will say, number one, we'll look weak. Number two, then the Iranians will just basically shut down the Straits of Hormuz. They'll charge everybody. Right now, Iran is basically, in their, I think, public messaging, they're saying we're justified in blockading the Straits of Hormuz because we have an aggressor here. If we leave, we take the aggressor out of the equation. And then the Iranians are going to have to go to the Indians, the Chinese, the Russians, all the GCC states they want to do trade with and explain why they're charging tolls. And I just simply don't think they'll do that. And then the Iranians are going to want to introduce their oil and everything else they have to sell onto the market. And we then use sanctions relief. And I think someone like President Trump, for all his faults, I think one of his strong suits is he can message this and say, we are restoring order to the region. And everybody, I think, will say, like, okay, we don't really think you are, but you actually, in essence, are restoring order. And I think a lot of credibility will come with us actually just being rational. We don't have to come out and fully say we made a mistake. We know that's not going to happen. But if we take steps to correct things, I do think we will start to put back, we'll put a good foot forward with the world, and they'll see that we're actually serious about being a rational actor and a constructive nation.
All right, I think we have time for one question that applies to both. Oh, okay, no. Waj says no. They are done. All right. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, give it up. We had Joe, Trita, who's packed the house. We see you, Trita. I see how you work. And Emily. All right, final panel. Do we need to stretch? We're good, right? We're good. Final panel. Robert Pape is one of the world's leading scholars of coercion, air power, and modern war, whose work has shaped debates inside governments, militaries, and universities for more than 2 decades. He has a Substack. It's called The Escalation Trap. You should actually subscribe to it. And he has a book coming out August. Robert, when's the release date for the book? August 12th. Our Own Worst Enemies, America in the Age of Political Violence. Mehdi Hasan single-handedly saved Islam on YouTube in his... Congratulations, Mehdi, for saving Islam on YouTube. In the Oxford debate. He is the founder of Zeteo. If you don't subscribe to Zeteo, subscribe right now. We had the Mehdi Hasan show on MSNBC, and he's the author of Win Every Argument. Mehdi and Robert, give a round of applause. All right. Let's get into it. Before we talk about the escalation trap, Robert, I want to take it back to 2003. I want to take it back to the war on terror. I believe and I assume that us three gents had the foresight that would be a disaster. And before we talk about the trap, I want to talk about the escalation crisis from 2003 that led us to this disaster in 2026.
So just to roll us back a little bit, September 2002, I was one of 30 professors to actually pay to get something in the New York Times. So this was organized. There's an ad. Yes, Shibli Tahami. It's actually, and basically I had to, and I was just an associate professor, and I still had to cough up $1,000, okay, because the New York Times was not cheap. And what we did is we took out an ad here in the New York Times where we explained that if we went to war against Iraq, this was going to be a disaster. We explained that it was highly unlikely there were much weapons of mass destruction because the open evidence did not support it, and that turned out to be exactly right. And we explained this would likely lead to civil war in Iraq and more terrorism. Well, my work at that point was on suicide terrorism, and so I knew quite a bit about what was likely to kick off, and that's how you and I got to really know each other in this, because just as here I predicted if we did Iran, ... would happen, well, there I was predicting if we did Iraq, we would get the suicide terrorism, and that unfolded. Well, in the New York Times, which had been my lifelong reading, I mean, when I was 16, you know what they did? They buried our ad that we paid. It was still published, but on the same page as Ken Pollack's op-ed calling for, literally, so those in the room, like the people in the long time know who Ken is, and we've known Ken for decades and decades. He was the big liberal proponent of this preventive war against Iraq. So here we go. We reached, all this money we had to pay out of our pocket. And what did the New York Times do? So this really was heartbreaking for me in so many ways. And what I saw here was that it really is important to understand that there was already the media, you saw in the Washington Post. So the idea that the liberal media and the conservative media are really going to be different and bail us out somehow is just a giant mistake. So I really believe that it's super important to take advantage of a tool today we did not have then, which is social media. Yeah, yes, because just breaking points, the episodes there, they get like 5 million views. Compare that to the standard stuff you see on MSN. It's nothing, right? So I really believe we have a way to push back, and I'll explain more of the urgency for this as we go on, And this is my big lesson from 2002.
Let me do a quick follow-up.
Oh, sorry.
Let me do a quick follow-up because we're talking about the escalation trap. Many people have mentioned it, but not everyone knows. I want to make sure everyone's on the same page. When you talk about the escalation trap, and specifically when you predicted it in February, that if Donald Trump does something that no other president has done in 47 years and engages in this unwinnable war by taking out Khamenei to replace him with his son, Khamenei, this will be an escalation trap. Can you please explain to folks who don't know what is the escalation trap?
Yes. So for 20 years, I've been modeling the bombing of Iran. Before that, I wrote a big book. My book is the book that you often hear, Air Power Has Never Toppled a Regime in History. Well, that's Bombing to Win. So that's the book that was published, lays out all the cases, really shows you that. And then I also taught for the U.S. Air Force in the 1990s. So I have a lot of experience with this whole issue. Well, I have a book that was half-done book I never published called The Smart Bomb Trap. And I decided that as the war was unfolding, why worry about publishing this? Just start putting some chapters. They were not full chapters, but they're like editorials on the escalation trap. And I laid out, here are the stages of what's going to happen 3 days before the bombing started. I didn't know exactly when, but 3 days went. And number one is the bombs are going to hit the target. That is the leadership targets. It's going to be a leadership targeting campaign. Number two, we're going to kill leaders. So a lot of people think, well, the reason this isn't going to work is you're not going to kill the leader. No, and number three is what's going to happen is the leadership right away is going to harden and they're going to lash back. And that's because this has happened numerous times in history, folks. 86, Reagan tried to kill Gaddafi with air power. 2 years later, he brings down Pan Am Flight 103, killing 270. Bill Clinton, I understand, very liberal audience here. He decides,
okay, you can shut up, Clinton.
well, just letting you know, just March 1999, he decides to do a 3-day air campaign against Milosevic, the leader of Serbia, to help the pro-democracy movement in Kosovo. And what happens? That totally fails to take out Milosevic, wreck his regime, and it triggers Milosevic to kick out 800,000 Kosovar civilians in the worst ethnic cleansing campaign here since World War II. Unbelievable. And they had no preparation, no backup plan for this whatsoever. So this had happened many times before. And I've been modeling this with Iran. And that's exactly what happened, folks, bit by bit. And also then the lashback here was they take Hormuz. So this was the natural thing that was going to happen. That then the trap here is we wouldn't back down. That's the trap. And why won't we back down? Why did Clinton keep going for 78 days until he finally got himself out of it? Because once the president does this, and it doesn't have to be the US president, Putin, others have gotten into the escalation trap too. If they back down, there's a giant L on their back. And you say, well, wait a minute. You got all these people in the public so upset. Donald Trump right now, what has he got to hold on to? 30%. 30%. What happens to Trump if he embraces the L? That goes down. That goes down. So this is the escalation trap. Lyndon Johnson, a Democrat, same problem he had in Vietnam. Owning the L is a giant problem here. And this is true for Democratic presidents. This is true for Republican presidents. This is true for smart presidents. This is true for kind of a little wacko presidents. So this is the escalation trap and why we're in a wicked problem now. But again, just to circle back to ray of hope, big ray of hope, we have something here that we've not had before that is the actual exit, which is you. And this is something we need to really talk about. Because if we don't do you, then the fork in the road is coming, I'll talk about later.
Speaking about the escalation trap, Professor Narges touched upon this. that the escalation could not have happened, Mehdi, without the consistent dehumanization of Muslims and brown folks and black folks for the past 40 plus years. And it's interesting. I've not shared the Q&A, the questions beforehand with Robert or any of the panelists, but you mentioned media. And you and I are a creature of the 80s. We saw the Hollywood movies. We cheered when Chuck Norris used to kill swaths of brown people. Then we grew up, we're like, that's hella racist. But without that, that would not have happened because it paints the Iranians as a threat, the Palestinians as a threat. And you still see in the year 2026, Mehdi, the dehumanization and the double standard. You saw it in San Diego, you see it with Iran. Talk to us about how the escalation crisis cannot occur without the media being complicit in the dehumanization of brown and black people.
Yes, a good question. Good evening, everyone. Great to be here. It's interesting that you mentioned the Oxford Union debate when I came up here. How many of you saw a debate I did on Islam about 13 years ago? In that debate, I cited Robert Pape's work on suicide terrorism being a response to foreign occupations, not to religion. So interesting full circle. Here we are talking about this stuff. Again, Waj, you're 100% right. There is no war in the Middle East. There is no occupation of Iraq. There is no bombing of Afghanistan. There is no attack on Iran without our news media failures, without Hollywood movies, without, as you say, go back to Chuck Norris, go back to a lot of films about the Middle East. Iran is still portrayed as a villainous force in many movies and TV shows. In fact, Top Gun Maverick last year. It's an Iran familiar movie, wasn't it? Now you have
it was Iranish.
Iranish, although they were more competent than the real world. Folks, so this is where we are today. Obviously, we're meeting at the end of a week where 3 Muslims were massacred in San Diego by 2 guys wearing Nazi imagery, an SS can, and a manifesto filled with accelerationist far-right rhetoric, praising the shooter from New Zealand who killed 51 Muslims, Brenton Tarrant, in Trump's first term. So this is where we are right now. Nothing has really changed. It's kind of very deja vu-esque. You're talking about 2002 New York Times ads. I mean, change the word Iraq to Iran. It's 1 letter for the American public, nice and easy. And then you throw in the Islamophobia. We're back to war on terror rhetoric. We've got Sebastian Gorka, the director of counterterrorism. The White House just put out a national counterterrorism strategy in which he says the 3 terrorists we have to focus on are narco-terrorists, left-wing terrorists, and Islamic terrorists. Who's missing from that list? Maybe the 2 terrorists who attacked a mosque in San Diego on Monday. So we're in a very strange deja vu administration, deja vu world, where you've got, just today, I think in the Washington Post, Mark Thiessen, who was a former Bush speechwriter, now loves Trump. Says Trump's the only president strong enough to take on Iran.
I think he permanently lives in Trump's anus. That's where he writes these articles from.
Well, interestingly, he referred to Trump's testicular fortitude today, which is interesting because Mark Thiessen used to work for George W. Bush. So when he says that Trump is the first president to have the strength to go after Iran, really he means he's the dumbest president to go after Iran. Even George W. Bush wasn't that dumb. Every day these days, I feel like I have to offer apologies to George Bush and then take a shower because I'm apologizing to George W. Bush. Because even George Bush wasn't dumb enough, as he writes in his memoir, he said, I couldn't go to war with Iran. So you have all these neocons, as Joe mentioned earlier, as Curt mentioned earlier, who hated Trump, but they love him now. This weekend, we may get another war. We're not sure if he's going to bomb Iran tomorrow or Cuba tomorrow. We do know he's going to bomb someone because he's using as an excuse not to go to Don Jr.'s wedding in the Bahamas. Imagine having to plan your news coverage. I swear to God, I was sitting right there before I came up, and my team we're on a group chat, and we're like, well, who's covering if we go to war tomorrow with Iran or Cuba? And we're like, well, Trump's not going to the Bahamas, so that is the telltale sign for DC media that something bad is going to happen this weekend.
Did you hear what he said? Literally what he said, for those who haven't followed the news, when he was asked about it, he goes, I won't go to the wedding. I'm really busy. I have to do with Iran. I know him for a long time. That's his son. He literally talked about his son. I've known him for a long time. Have you ever said that about your children?
He's never loved Don Jr., let's be fair. But that's where we are. So we get another war, and you're right. It is fundamentally, when it comes to Middle East wars, it is fundamentally about dehumanization. We know that when it comes to Middle East wars. We know the difference when we talk about refugees. You don't need me to tell you in this room the very different reaction to the invasion of Ukraine versus Gaza, which happened at the same time. right? When historians look back, Gaza and Ukraine happened at the same time, 2022, 2023, and you saw the very different reactions from our news media, from journalists saying, literally saying stuff like blonde-haired, blue-eyed people, a country of peace. It's not like the Middle East, one anchor said at the time. So we're seeing that. We see how viscerally people respond to different conflicts. And right now, I can just give you an example. On yesterday, 12-year-old Palestinian boy killed in Gaza. How can that be? I was told there was a ceasefire in Gaza, but a 12-year-old boy was killed in Gaza. On Tuesday, the Israelis bombed a house in Lebanon, killed 12 people, six of them were women and children, 3 children, 3 women. But there's supposed to be a ceasefire in Lebanon. How can that be? Can you imagine if it was the reverse? If Hezbollah had killed 3 children in Israel on Tuesday, if Hamas had killed an Israeli 12-year-old boy on Thursday, we would not be talking about a ceasefire. It would be leading our news. It is not leading our news right now because we dehumanize the people in the Middle East. We don't just dehumanize them there, we dehumanize them here. The New York Times this week ran a piece about Zoran Mamdani doing a video for Nakba Day. And their objection to him doing a video for Nakba Day was, what was his objection? Well, you didn't talk about the Holocaust. And you didn't talk about, and I'm all for talking about the Holocaust. We have a country full of Holocaust deniers, some of whom the president hosts for dinner. But that's not the point. The point is that a Palestinian cannot have their story told without always being challenged and interrogated and second-guessed and being told to always think about the people who were oppressing them, because we were also told we weren't told about Israel's side of the story. So fundamentally, whether you're looking at the New York Times or you're looking at Fox News, quote unquote, you are seeing the dehumanization of Palestinians, Iranians, Lebanese, Muslims. When San Diego happened on Monday, a guy went on Fox and said it must have been Iran because that was a Sunni mosque, so maybe the Shias did it. That is the fucked up country we're in right now, where no matter what happens, the victims are blamed.
Let me do a follow-up to that. And then, Robert, I'm going to go back to you. Speaking about things that don't change. What doesn't change is the penalty when you criticize Israel.
0. When you criticize Israel.
Yeah.
I think when you criticize Muslims.
Melissa Barrera, the face of Scream, loses her job. Joyanne Reid, I've talked to her about it. The critiques that she had at the artist formerly known as MSNBC, now known as MS Now. What you go through, right? The Democratic audit, because we're talking about bipartisan, so let's be fair. The audit was finally released. The the DNC promised the release of the audit, then Ken Martin went against the audit. The audit was released. The New York Times has 5 takeaways. The words Israel and Gaza are mentioned 0 times. 0 times, Mehdi. The year is 2026. I already mentioned the New York Times Siena polls. You've seen the polls. Joe's talked about the polls. Curt talks about the polls. The young Republicans, they're like, we need a break with Israel. Majority of Democrats, every single demographic, we need a break with Israel. And yet the Democratic Party, in the year 2026, when they see the polls, they release an audit. When the YouGov poll came out right after the election, the number one reason, not the only reason, why 18 million Democrats stayed at home was because of the Gaza genocide. The year is 2026. The week is this week. 0 mentions of Gaza. Talk to us about the Democratic complicity when it comes to things not changing with Israel.
Even Kamala Harris in her memoir kind of accepts that she screwed up big time on this. That moment on The View when Sunny Huston asked her, what would you do differently to Joe Biden? This is, I think, October 2024. And she says, nothing. Nothing. That was the moment I thought she lost the election. Nothing. Not just on Gaza, on anything. An insane thing to say in an election where people want change. We know that they've been covering this up. We know that Ken Martin covers up. The whole autopsy is a joke. They fired the guy who wrote it. It's unfinished, and they published it. As you say, there's no mention of Gaza or Israel. Even though the IMEU here in Washington, D.C., the Institute for Middle East Understanding, they went and met with the DNC authors of the report, and they say in the meetings Gaza was brought up. So why is it not in the report? The IMEU polling with YouGov, you mentioned, shows very clearly one of the main reasons in swing states people stayed at home was because of Gaza. What a genius move that was, the Harris campaign, sending Bill Clinton to Michigan to talk about the Jewish claims to the land, sending Richie Torres to the Michigan, sending Liz Cheney to Michigan. What genius moves those were by political strategists. That was what happened. We all know what happened. I think Rob Flaherty was deputy campaign manager under Kamala Harris, a very good piece for The Bulwark, which I urge you all to read, in which he makes a very good point that even if you don't think that people went to the polls and voted based on that, they didn't stay at home, even though many people in Michigan I know did. Even if you don't buy that it was a policy error, that it was a policy motivation, What it did do was it destroyed enthusiasm across the board, and it meant that wherever Harris went or Biden went, there were hecklers, there were protesters. It meant, I think the phrase he used was like, what he quotes a strategist in his piece saying, it was like one big dead rotting fish hanging around her neck, right? And that's what it did to their campaign. The fact that they won't admit it. Ilan Goldenberg, who was a former liaison for Harris' campaign with Jewish communities, he said today on Twitter, one of the biggest mistakes we made was not letting a Palestinian speak on stage at the DNC. I was there at the time. It was insane, insane that a Palestinian couldn't speak, whereas hostage families could speak. Leon Panetta, former CIA director, came out when everyone was waiting for Beyonce, and they got Leon Panetta.
Because the kids want Leon Panetta.
The kids wanted Leon Panetta, but not a Palestinian. And by the way, it wasn't just a rando Palestinian pulled off the street. We don't know what they're going to say. It was a Palestinian-American Democratic state lawmaker from Georgia, Ruhr Ahmad, who was going to stand on stage and endorse Kamala Harris, which would be great for Harris. So, again, masterful political strategist there. Look, they don't want to talk about this stuff because they know that they don't want to make any major changes. If they concede that 2024 was partly about Gaza, then they may have to make changes for 2028. And they don't want to make changes for 2028, even though they can see the writing on the wall. Rahm Emanuel, a man who went to volunteer for the Israeli military in Gulf War I, is now saying Israel should buy its own weapons. Wow, I've heard it all. So the Democrats are moving. To give credit to the base, they've moved. I would push back against Joe and Curt, and they're not here, unfortunately. But, let's just be clear about the Republican Party here. A lot of you hear about the split in MAGA. It's overstated. Trita and I have had this debate for a long time. I just checked the New York Times Siena polling before I came on stage. 70% of Republicans support the war in Iran and support Trump's war in Iran. 22% oppose. Right? Donald Trump's approval rating this week, according to Siena College New York Times, was 82% with Republicans. 82%. Only 14% of Republicans give him a disapproval rating. So let us be clear here. I'm glad that there are voices like Joe and Curt and even Tucker and MTG. I'm glad they're speaking out. But they do not represent, unfortunately, a significant chunk of Republicans in this country. They make a lot of noise, great. But unfortunately, they don't. And they're actually still, and I'm proud to say there's someone on the left, the anti-war energy and momentum still comes from our side of the political spectrum, and long may that continue.
Robert, the reason why, a lot of people might say, and this goes back to the dehumanization, the double standards. Mehdi and I, spoiler alert, are Muslim, and we're brown-skinned men. And so when we talk about Palestine, Israel, they just think, oh, you're Muslim. All right. And then what we say is, no. Gaza and Israel is not a Muslim issue. It's not a Palestinian issue. It's not an Arab issue. This is a Gaza generation. People have been radicalized around the world. They've seen a genocide streamed on their phone. Please take this seriously. And they say, oh, you only criticize Israel because you're Muslim, right? And we're like, no. Look at the polls. You have to change, right? You have to pivot away from this. And then I give you these examples, right? The Democratic Party to this day does not change. You heard Professor Narges talk about Israel's strategy. Trita has talked about it as well. Trita has said, if I'm misquoting you, you're right in the front row. You can quote yourself. Israel seeks permanent security and stability by getting permanent instability for every other country in the Middle East, right? Mow the lawn. So clearly we need to end forever wars. We have this rampaging elephant in the room, Israel. And both sides right now in 2026 refuse to rein in this rampaging elephant. Robert, and in this, again, I want to say this clearly. Israel is a nation state. There are Jews in America. There are Jews in this room who say, not in our name. This does not have to do anything with Judaism or Jews. We're talking about a nation state. Israel, as a nation state, in order to end forever wars, what is a new policy and framework to dealing with Israel?
So the key thing that we need to do, you heard Joe mention this, is we need a down payment now that we're going to be serious. We, the United States, if we're going to move forward in a way that is not going to make everything worse, I'm worried we're going to make everything worse, by the way. But if we're going to go down the other path and try to make things better, we need a real down payment. So we can talk about ideas that we might be able to cut a deal with Iran, and I'm glad to tell you what that could look like. But I think right now we're not going to get a serious hearing because we've done too many things to spoil it, and we've done too many things to let Israel spoil it. So this is not a situation where we're coming in de novo. There's a lot here that will make it almost impossible for, and this would be true for a Democratic president. So you think this is only a Republican problem. This is something, all we have to do is reelect the new Obama and everything will be different. No, I'm sorry, folks. We reelected Donald Trump twice. Okay.
Not we, but
Well,
yes.
I'm just telling you that I don't mean this people in this room. I'm just saying as the world understands this, we've reelected him twice. Okay. And this is not going to be easy to come out of it just by changing horses midstream. But what do I mean? I think we need a serious military containment policy for Israel. So we need to talk about this. And by the way, I think I would take advantage of a roadmap that Netanyahu offered on 60 Minutes. I'd be a little bit differently. I think I'll interpret the words maybe differently than he might have. But just on 60 Minutes, 10 days ago, Netanyahu said that he's already expecting that Israel should go its own way. And in 10 years, Israel should not receive any aid whatsoever from the United States. Well, okay, but 10 years can be
So
interpreted.
they could take Syria and Lebanon and
Well,
yeah.
just hold it a minute. So you can look at something, and I would just start. Okay, Prime Minister Netanyahu, let's start with 10 years. But, you know, that doesn't have to be 5% now, 3% now. We're going to escalate. You can start with 20% this year, right now. We can start with this, and we can move forward with a roadmap. And I would just start to go down that road because you're hearing from Joe the details of what this might look like. I think sort of a little higher altitude here, we need to just sort of understand that if Israel is going to continue to be a spoiler, and they've spoiled negotiations with Iran at least twice, maybe even more than that, depending on how you read the tea leaves here. So this is not really going to work out. So we can have a better policy. But if we are going to have that policy spoiled by a third party, this is not really going to work out. So I think a military containment policy of Israel makes sense.
Can I just add to that? There's very important debate going on in Washington, D.C. right now, especially in the Democratic Party on the left, what to do about weapons sales, what to do about military aid, what to do about Iron Dome. And you have a bunch of congressmen now switching. Members of Congress, AOC has switched. Ro Khanna's taken a strong position. A lot of people now saying we should not be funding Iron Dome, right? This is the quote-unquote defensive weaponry. And Joe made a very good point earlier, which is it is not solely defensive. It allows Israel to go on the offense. When you know you can't be touched, you're allowed to go around like a bully in the neighborhood. And it's very interesting, though, that the debate has become about military aid. And a lot of members of Congress, including Democrats, including leftists, are saying, well, let them buy their own weapons. Why are we funding it? And I think the bar is very low. I think that's a great first step. But we shouldn't stop with that first step. Let me just be very clear. I'm sure people are watching on YouTube, too. This will be clipped by people who don't like me. Let me be very clear. It's not that they should buy their own weapons. It's we should not be selling them weapons. Forget aid. And this argument that people say, well, why would you not let them buy Iron Dome? Do we let Russia buy Iron Dome? Do we let other I'm sure Russian civilians deserve protection from Ukrainian missiles. Just because I'm a supporter of Ukraine against a Russian invader doesn't mean Russian civilians should die in counterattack. I mean, that argument is an absurd argument. And nobody's asking you to do BDS or something, you know, that you think is some left-wing crazy Palestinian thing. Just follow the law. We talked earlier, Waj, you and I, about, you know, what should the next Democratic candidate do in 2028? It's very simple. People say, what grand plan should the Democrats have? There is no need for a grand plan. Just enforce the law. It's what the uncommitted movement said in 2024. The uncommitted movement had always said to the Biden administration is follow the law. American law says you can't sell these weapons. The Leahy law says you cannot sell weapons to militaries which are engaged in brazen human rights abuses. The Foreign Assistance Act says you cannot sell weapons to a country which is using aid as a weapon of war, which our own civil servants, our own government department said Israel was doing. Of course, the International Criminal Court says Israel is doing. So it's not rocket science. You know, the most annoying phrase you hear in this town and in our American media when it comes to the Middle East, even from well-intentioned people, is people who say, oh, the Middle East, it's so complicated. It's not complicated at all. It's not complicated at all. You don't sell weapons to people who are bombing kids and starving civilians. That is not hard, right? That is not some big ask of Gavin Newsom or J.B. Pritzker or Pete Buttigieg or whichever person ends up being the next presidential candidate. Just enforce the law.
And I want to ask a question to be fair. It's not just Israel. We also have Sunni Gulf states who have sold out the Palestinian people. And we have Sunni Gulf states on the deal are like, yeah, let's remove Iran. let's remove the theocracy, right?
Well, you also have pro-Israel people in this town who say, "Oh, you're picking on Israel. What about Saudi Arabia? Yeah, don't sell.
Yeah, don't sell.
weapons either.
Don't sell
I'm
it.
pretty consistent."
I was looking at the camera. It's okay. You don't have to sell it to Saudi Arabia either. But to be fair, and we're trying to be fair here, you have to also renegotiate how you deal with these Sunni states, right? And these Sunni states are now thinking about, wait a second, Robert, I thought having American troops in an American base would protect me. No, it hasn't. How would you deal with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, and UAE?
Yeah, so the first thing I want to do is we can get into the details here, but I think we need to come up with a name. We need to talk about a name. And let me just say that we got out of 2 forever wars, and we didn't really know what our strategy was, even have a name for it in the Middle East. We just didn't know. And the public, when we bombed Iran on February 28, you know what the polling showed? You know how much of the public knew about that we had even killed the supreme leader 3 days later? Barely 20% of the public. 20% of the public. Just sort of a... So I think one of the key things we need to understand is if we don't have a name, and I'm going to give you a minute. We are at risk of the lobbies. We're at risk of basically, if you don't know where you're going, any road is going to get you there. So what I would say is a very simple name that we should be pushing: strategic restraint in the Middle East. Restraint is the name I would give to it. And that's not just restraint in US policy. That's restraint in Israel. That's what it's about, restraint, you see, also with the Gulf states. And one of the key things with restraint should be that America is not going to get in the business of fighting other people's wars. Yes, we need to say things like this. Whether that's Israel's war, whether that's a UAE war, whether it's MBS's war, I think we need to understand that we need to be not sort of use buzzwords that go to different parts of the aisle. That's, I think, going to be just the challenge. People, especially candidates, well, of course, they're just going to want to get elected. And so they're going to pick buzzwords that fit of who's going to go and vote for them. But that's not really, I think, going to help us, because this is how we got in this problem in the first place, folks. So I think we need to understand we need a policy of strategic restraint. And the number one thing that, and it applies not just to us, but applies to others that we will call our friends or allies or not, but it applies to everybody. And what we should be saying is, don't fight other people's wars. This is a very important policy here. And I think that will go a long way. And then a lot of the details that I'm hearing here, I think, can be worked out. And basically, Washington is good at that. I don't think Washington is very good at communicating with the public. That's what I really have learned here, is that I think that I'm seeing on Substack, oh my God, what we could really do here with the public, I don't think that's coming out of Washington.
When you say other people's wars, do you mean other countries, other governments?
Oh, yes.
Because then that's fine for the Middle East, where clearly you don't want to fight Saudi Arabia's war or Israel's war. But like Cuba, for example, whose war are we fighting in Cuba? We're fighting for billionaires, oligarchs,
or
exiles,
or the Cuba
giving
lobby,
Marco
or the
Rubio
Cuba
something
lobby.
to do.
Yeah, the Cuba lobby in southern Florida, which has been the big lobby calling for this war for pretty much forever. So as maybe it's not obvious to folks, but it probably is to many of you, we have a lot of expatriates in our country, and those expatriates cozy up to the CIA real quick. And what are they telling the CIA? Go topple my government.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's because they left. They don't like that government, and they get. And
unfortunately, parts of the Iranian diaspora, not all, but parts.
No, I don't mean to blame everybody but I'm just letting.
A very good poll which showed, I think, that it's not a majority of Iranians at all, as people assume, that support war in Iran, and certainly that number's probably changed since the war began. Can I just say one thing? I do worry, in front of a can I say a largely lefty crowd, dare I say it, that I see in recent months, because so many lefties love now listening to people on the right when it comes to foreign policy, because some on the right now have taken on better positions. I now hear some of this rhetoric being repeated, like, for example, America first, right? You hear that phrase all the time. I hear lefties now saying, America first, which is, I get it. I get why it works when Tucker Carlson says it and MTG says it, because they're saying to their voters, you know, old school Republican isolationism. Why are we spending money on this ridiculous war there? Why are we spending $70 billion in Iran? We could be spending that in Georgia or Mississippi or Alabama. I get that. I do think it's a dangerous road to go down, because I thought of that when you said restraint, right? I'm all for restraint, but I don't want it to turn into some weird isolationism which says F the rest of the world, right? Because America does have a role to play in the world, doing good deeds, right? Helping in a way that we can with our wealth and our resources. There is an Ebola outbreak right now. In 2014, American doctors, experts led the way in fighting back against that Ebola outbreak. Last year, a man whose name I don't want to take tonight, but I will, Elon Musk, joked in the cabinet room that, we accidentally fired the Ebola team as part of our do. Well, we hired them back. Actually, they didn't hire them back. And therefore, today, USAID is gutted. And when something like Ebola happens, there is no American leadership. That's the kind of place I would like to see America.
So
but the America Firsters, I worry, will say, you know what? None of that has anything to do with it.
I will jump in after you real quick, because for a sake of time.
So let me just add another phrase here: strategic restraint and economic enlargement. So one of the key things here that I think we're kind of stuck.
Professor, by the way, I just want to say.
That's just what I do. And what I
the idea is great. The framing.
I'm just saying that
we're not judging you. Just continue.
It's okay. It's okay.
The acronym is SRI.
Yeah. But what I think we need to understand here is that across both the right and the left, there is a crying need for economic revitalization. Why is it you have the under 30 vote here? It's not just simply being upset about what's happening over there, it's AI. And I know, because I've got them in my classes. Yeah. We have folks that are under 30, under 35, really, panicking because they've spent all this money on these fancy degrees. And what's happening is, it's not just getting a job. They're thinking they're going to get a job and pretty soon be put out because of AI. And I think that what we need to focus on here is we need to widen this. So it's not just about don't do X over there, be stable over there, but I think we also need some more attention here to the economy.
A lot more attention.
And I think that this is crucial and it's not true. It's just a right-wing issue or a left-wing issue. I know each side thinks it's only their issue, but I do the poll. This is in my book that's coming out. I do a ton of polling. I've done 20 national surveys of the American public. I know a lot about political violence in the United States, who supports it, all those details, and a lot about I've done focus groups with 80 people, listening to them across the aisle. And I'll tell you, it really changed my view on America. Because, for example, I had no idea just how badly the student loan problem was wrecking the futures of so many people. And they each feel it's happening only to them. Okay? Because it really is a big problem here for them. But I really have come away thinking that, my goodness, this is a real problem here. So it's not just don't fight other people's wars. It's the number one thing we should be thinking about is for our prosperity is our development here at home. And I gave a talk here in Texas about a month ago. And somebody was running for Senate from no, it wasn't Texas, but somebody was, and he came up to me and he said, "Oh, that's really great, Professor Pape. That's my number 3 priority." Well, anytime I hear a politician tell me that's the number 3 priority, there's a lot of number 3 priorities here. And so I think that it's not the foreign policy I'm imagining here is not just restraint over there. It's about the priority that we should be doing more to invest here. That's why I said we lost $5 trillion in those forever wars. We're now $39 trillion in debt. That could have either been 34 trillion or we could have invested it and we'd be half in debt. So I really think that this is something we should be pushing forward as we go forward. And I just don't hear this enough being put this way. And that's what I see online. That's what I see people coming at me. That's what I'm getting from my students.
And it's bipartisan. And
oh my God,
and
it's across the board.
To close the loop, how it's connected, you see many of these people, these young people who are radicalized, they're saying, I don't have money to literally go to college. I have to ration my insulin, but you can give billions of dollars to a foreign country to do an Iron Dome. WTF.
Yes.
So it is connected.
Exactly.
And if you actually invest in countries instead of bombing them, you won't have the refugee crisis. You would actually have countries and allies who actually have economic independence.
And what I really
I gotta stop just for sake of time. Final question, then Q&A. Is Andy here? I'm gonna 10 more minutes. Can I cheat? Mehdi, did you eat? Because Mehdi gets grumpy when he hasn't eaten. All right. Look at his face. I saw his face. Because he looked at me and goes, I'm hungry. The food here is halal, Mehdi. There is halal options. We'll eat afterwards. Last question before I open up the Q&A. Joe said something, because we shit on Democrats, we shit on Israel and the Sunni Gulf states, and the United States try to be very fair. Let's talk about Donald Trump for a second, because at the end of the day, Donald Trump is the president of the United States. And it was his decision to ignore Coates. It was his decision to ignore Rubio. It was his decision to literally sit there and get dog-walked into this unwinnable war by Benjamin Netanyahu. It was his decision to blow up the U.S.-Iran deal. It was his decision to join Israel in the 12-day war. And Joe said something which I had to write down. You know, that first administration, I believe Donald Trump thread the needle very intelligently. All right.
I mean,
Mehdi, listen. My
please.
take on this is the following. You might laugh because you heard Joe say this. You heard Trita say this. I'm going to just be blunt. Knowing Trump's personality, right? Following him for 10 years. And to save lives, the idea that I have is you get a bunch of Muslim majority countries. You create an award. It's the greatest ever president to help the Middle East in the history of all time award. It's golden. You make it really big and shiny. You go to the White House and you say, President Trump, you have won the first ever, greatest president ever in the history of the Middle Eastern foreign relations politics for children who can't read good award. You surround it with him. You do 2 fake headlines in the New York Times, fake headlines.
Yes, Zoran did it.
And you give it to him, and you might laugh at me. That might be the way for him to avoid the L and say, I'm the greatest president. I won the first award. It's me. And we might have peace.
You joke, Watch, but I'm trying to think about this. About 7-8 years ago, 2017, I want to say, Trump comes into office and he was bragging about defeating ISIS, if you remember, even though Barack Obama had done the heavy lifting. And Trump comes in, and I remember saying to a colleague of mine, I was at Al Jazeera at the time, I said the simplest way for Abu Bakr Baghdadi, who was then alive and the leader of ISIS, to get Trump off his back is to open a Trump tower in Raqqa. That would be the easiest way. And I was only half joking. Recently, we learned that President Shara of Syria, former leader of Al-Qaeda in Syria, is offering a Trump tower in Damascus, right? So the stuff that we joked about 10 years ago is real life. When you joke about peace prizes, Trump has now said multiple times, this is not reporting from Jonathan Swan and Maggie Haven, he said it on the record publicly, that I used to believe in peace. He said it recently. I was all for peace, but they didn't give me a peace prize. So now I'm for war? Like, I laugh as I say it, but it's real, folks. It's not a joke.
FIFA World Peace Prize.
The FIFA World Peace Prize wasn't enough for him. He wanted the Nobel. He didn't get the Nobel. He said this openly. He said, I told the Norwegians, you didn't give me the prize, so I don't care about peace anymore. So in a way, you're joking, but actually, if you did, deal with that weird ego and insecurity and narcissism and childishness of his, you might get somewhere when it comes to war and peace.
Real quick, can you mention, because you said it, for the people who don't know, Mamdani did this and it worked. Can you explain to folks?
He went to the White House. The first time he went to the White House, he didn't take anything with him and he just won him over with his boyish charm to the point where you saw Trump was laughing as Mamdani called him a fascist to his face.
It's okay. It's okay. You can say it.
You can say it. I mean, Donald Trump looks at Mamdani the way I've never seen anyone look at anyone else. He doesn't look at Melania the way he looks at Zoran. Amazing. By the way, Zoran went to the White House after Shara and MBS. So Donald Trump might hate Muslim women, but he loves Muslim men. So Budge, you and me might have a chance. Mamdani went back to the White House recently and took with him a mock-up of a front page of the Times showing that Donald Trump saved New York and played into Trump's ego saying, we don't agree on anything, but we both love New York City. So that clearly worked in the short. And that afternoon, Trump freed a Palestinian detainee from ICE after Mamdani came back. So, small victory. On a serious point about Trump's record, this idea, and some people on the left have bought into it, this idea that Trump is anti-war or has ever been anti-war is absurd. Go back to the first term. In the first 2 years of his presidency, 2016 to 2018 or 2017 to 2019, Donald Trump killed more people with drones in his first 2 years than Barack Obama killed over 8 years. But we call Obama the drone president, rightly, but no one knows anything about Trump's drone strike record. He killed more people in Somalia than Bush and Obama. He killed more people. He increased the death toll in Syria. He bombed Syria. Remember, he said, I was eating a beautiful piece of chocolate cake, and we bombed Syria, he said on Fox. And of course, he killed Qasem Soleimani, which could have been the beginning of an Iran war then. I always point out to people, the only reason we didn't go to war in January 2024 is because the Iranians showed restraint and, bombed an American military base and hurt some soldiers and gave them, headaches, brain injuries, whatever it was, but didn't kill anyone. So this idea that he's anti-war, there was no basis for it even before he went to Michigan in 2024 and said, I won't send your boys to war. Stephen Miller tweeted, Donald Trump will not send Americans to the Middle East. And that is a fundamental problem that we've completely misread this man. He was always fine with war. He doesn't want long wars, but he has no problems bombing and blowing shit up, which is why God help the people of Cuba in the next few days and weeks as to what's going to happen to them.
Robert, should we give him an award?
I don't think, let's put let me just build on what Mehdi said here just right at the end about Trump and war. So a lot of people are asking, are we going to bomb? Well, let me offer you my thoughts on this, which I don't think anybody has said here or in the media, which is, I think there is a very good chance that we're going to bomb and start the bombing when we think we have the new supreme leader in our gun sights and we have a 90% plus chance of killing him. That is what I think we're waiting for. So if you follow what's happened, so again, I study air power, I do this a lot. If you want to know, when did we start the 2003 Iraq war? What was the actual trigger to the war? Because we had the troops there and so forth. It was the day, the 12 hours that we thought we had Saddam Hussein in our gun sights. That's when CIA Director Tenet ran to the Oval Office and said, George Bush, we've got him. And we had a human agent in a basement. And by the way, Saddam Hussein actually, as the F-117s were dropping their bombs, literally left outside the door 5 minutes before the bombs hit. And we didn't tell the human agent to leave. Just to give you a sense of how serious we are about this. When did we exactly start? Why is it February 28th? Why wasn't it February 21? Why wasn't it, February 14th? Why wasn't it March 14th? I think I'll tell you why, which is that's when we thought, and this was from the Israelis, this is like the specific piece of tactical information, that we had the supreme leader dead to rights. We were going to kill him for real, which means you know exactly where the meeting is, you know exactly who he's meeting with, and you're watching this in real time as the bombs are literally killing the individual. So I think that as we go forward here, one of the reasons you could be seeing Trump bouncing back and forth is he's just basically waiting. One of the games I think we're playing with the supreme leader, why do we mock him, his manhood and so forth? We're trying to get him to reveal information. And I believe this is something that we're just not recognizing as a real possibility. So I don't know.
And then we replace him with Supreme Leader Ahmadinejad. Yes.
Yeah, and I'm not saying this is going to work. I'm saying it's going to make everything worse. I'm just trying to tell you, we're heading down a road here where Trump is looking for any kind of real W. I really don't know that the prize idea would work here, but I do think that he could talk himself into thinking, I kill the next supreme leader, that's the W. I don't think it will be the W. I'm not telling you that's the reality. I'm saying what is in Trump's head, that has been a common issue with other leaders as well.
When double down doesn't work, triple down, we're in Groundhog's Day from hell. I'm mindful of everyone's time. I appreciate everyone staying. It's amazing that you all have been here for 2.5 hours. Let's take 3 questions all at once, and then we'll have them answered. Then they'll eat some halal meat. Sir, you had your hand up for about 12 minutes.
Thanks so much for this panel. I'm a big supporter of Zeteo, and I think you guys in Drop Site News, I'm a subscriber, and Drop Site News are doing phenomenal reporting. But I would say, I don't think Trump made the decision. I think Mary Middleton made the decision, and Netanyahu, and you talked about when he made the decision. I think that's it. One of the questions I have for you guys is, I think it's very refreshing to see younger generations seeing things through the eyes of fairness and justice. And no one's talked about the conflation of anti-Semitism with criticizing Israel. I think that's a huge issue as well. But my question to you is, how do you think we can leverage this kind of issue going forward? I think that to Mehdi's quick point on dehumanization, Diana Bush has been talking about that for decades. And I think that that's something we need to, older generation, I'm Generation X, but I look around this room and there's not that many Generation Zs and younger people in here. And so how do we get those folks to really pay attention?
First question. Second question, we'll go right behind the lady with the glasses to the left.
The lady with the glasses, that's you.
Hi, I'm a University of Chicago Law School grad, so go Maroons. I wanted to ask about the economics of the war. So we've got a lot of recent reporting about our missile interceptors have been depleted more than we thought and more than the Israelis. And actually their weapon systems, they've been uncovering them. They've been ramping up production. Our missiles cost a lot more and we have to put a lot more of them in the air to get their cheaper ones down. So I feel like long term, the economics strongly favor the Iranians.
Without a doubt.
And with what I think Joe Kent said, Israel wants to do this war, in perpetuity. How do we square those two things? Which it does seem like the economics favor them, and we cannot win with a long drawn out war.
And final question: the gentleman in the red who has strained his arm and has enlisted his friend to point at him. That's a good friend. Well done.
Thank you so much. So, Professor Pape, talking about the U option, what do you think would need to be true for Trump to actually take the L politically here in the United States? And if the Strait of Hormuz is still closed by October, do you think that those conditions will exist?
What will it take for Trump to take the L? How do we actually engage young people and have them part of this growing multicultural coalition? And how do we convince, or how can we militarily and economically keep supplying Israel, which seems to be wanting a perpetual war when we are literally running out of munitions?
So on the escalation trap, one of the things I put papers on, is I've studied for 30 years economic blockades, economic sanctions. I know a lot about this. I've published about it. And one of the big things that just to know is that a big issue in all of the economic assessments you're seeing, including the markets, has been their assumption this will be a short war. The assumption still, the IMF, this will probably come out next week with their new estimates, and you're probably going to see a lot lower growth here. And it's because their assessment has been built on a 6-week war. And they have not updated that assessment since they made that assessment. This is going to change because obviously we're past 6 weeks, double past 6 weeks. What I think you're likely going to see in June, maybe the middle of June, is what I think is technically called a freak out. Because you're going to see this is not all unpredictable. This is pretty predictable what's coming in the world. And when that happens, I think there's an opportunity, and that's how this is linked. I think that there's an opportunity because that freak out is either going to cause Trump, because he's going to worry about that L, to even more likely want to go down the escalation track because he's going to see that is where this is all heading. Or there's a possibility here over the next month, we start to do more online. We start to do more here because Trump loves numbers, folks. So you're saying, what is one of the things he tracks? He does care about numbers, and I do think, you heard it earlier here with Curt, you heard that he's worried about that. It'd be very reasonable here, Susie Wiles and Trump, to worry about that 45%. Well, this whole idea here that we're talking about, this could actually, I can't say for sure because Trump's chaos kid, so I'm not predicting the guy, but I am saying that we really are going to see much bigger economic costs going down the pike here. And that is because the only way we're going to be out of that hole is if Iran magically gives up and gives us the straight back. And I don't see any chance of that happening anytime soon. There's no Chinese pressure. All those easy off-ramps are totally gone. That means, again, I'll keep saying this over and over again, we're only scratching the edge of social media here. And I don't really know exactly how to cut across this. All I know is that I'm basically a centrist, notice, okay? And Waj, basically a progressive liberal, and we managed to get along, and of course others I've managed to get along with, and I'm just saying, I really think this is all to our advantage, and that's what I really want to say going forward.
Final word to you, and also on how to engage young folks.
Yeah, so just very quickly on those questions. On the economics, I would say one thing. I am someone who thinks the Republican Party is still a cult. I mentioned the polling earlier. I don't buy into this idea that everyone's going to pull away from it. I've been hearing this for 11 years. Oh, now they're going to turn on it. And it's not happened. I know Joe suggested after the midterms, members of Congress return. I don't buy it. You look at Bill Cassidy, who just lost his primary. Suddenly he's voting the right way because his career's over, right? Which is a reminder that they all know what they're doing is wrong, right? As soon as they get the freedom, then they're all... So, but on the economy, there is one area where I think the cult could break. The only area, which is the gas station, right? We know that from the Biden era. We know from 2022 those gas prices really destroyed his presidency. And I think and the Iranians know this, by the way. My colleague Swin Susak was reporting about how American officials and intelligence officials have told him that they think the Iranians are holding out for the midterm because they think that they can do sufficient damage to Trump's economy. Trump, like a madman, instead of dealing with it, says stuff like, I don't think about Americans' financial situations at all. Just says it out loud, crazy shit. In terms of how is he going to take the L, the gentleman's question in the back, of course he's not going to take an L. The man's never taken an L on anything in his life. Just a reminder, we all talk about the 2020 election. In 2016, Donald Trump lost the Iowa caucuses to Ted Cruz. What did he say? He said Ted Cruz rigged the election. Right? It doesn't matter who beats him, where they beat him. Something happened in his childhood that means he cannot accept any kind of defeat. And therefore, the George Bush mission accomplished banner was available to him at some point to take. Probably too late now. I'm torn between wanting him to just declare victory, get a peace prize, and go home for the sake of the Middle East, but also this idea that we should let him get away with declaring victory. Imagine if Donald Trump says, I won, we reopened the Strait of Hormuz, which was open before he went to war. Imagine if that's how we grade him on a curve and let him take victory for something that was not an issue until he went to war. That would just show how insane a timeline we live in. In terms of one quick thing on this gentleman's 2 points. One is I agree with you. We probably wouldn't be in this war without Benjamin Netanyahu and people like Miriam Adelson. But I also don't think we should remove agency from Donald Trump. The man is president of the United States, the most powerful man in the world. Sometimes people around him, Joe and others who are still deep down supporters of his MAGA movement will say stuff like, well, Donald Trump was tricked and fooled and dragged here and there. And Donald Trump, despite behaving like a child, is still a man, is still an adult. And I think we should judge him as an adult. It's ridiculous that this person did this, and he has to take responsibility for it. In terms of dehumanizing, I think we're in a very interesting moment in history. We talked at the beginning of this panel about how attitudes are changing generationally. We are in a very different position. If you look at the polling, basically everyone under the age of 50 is fed up with our Middle East policy and our Israel support. That's bipartisan. Republicans under the age of 50, Democrats under the age of 50, independents under the age of 50. It's basically old folks who still want to keep sending arms to Israel and say, well, don't give a shit about brown people or black people or Muslims. And I'm generalizing, obviously not all over, but the polling shows it's a generational gap more than it even is an ideological or party gap, which means basically that for us to win this battle against dehumanization, and by the way, thank you, sir, for your support for Zeteo and for Drop Site. Support independent media. It's really important in this moment. And if you're not a Zeteo subscriber, I do not forgive you. In this moment, we have to remember that there's no point just looking at the polls and patting ourselves on the back. This is a time to ramp up, not down, right? The fact that you are all here tonight on a Friday night in DC, okay, it's raining, but on a Friday night in DC, listening to these panels, engaging, asking questions, that is what we need more of, right? We can't just sit behind our screens. We can't just sit with each other going, oh, look at this poll, or look at this Instagram video. Now is the time for people in this room to take this evidence of momentum, to take this evidence of a groundswell, a change in public opinion. I never thought I would see in my lifetime Pew and Gallup doing polling showing that Americans support Palestinians more than Israelis. I never thought I would see that. But this is not the moment to sit back on our laurels and say, well, they've lost the argument, everyone hates AIPAC. Actually, AIPAC just took out a member of Congress a few days ago. Now is the moment to step up our resistance and our campaigning and our energy and our conversations around this issue. It's not to be complacent. It's to take what we've won so far and to build on it so that those previous generations, their influence goes down and that young people are not just complaining on TikTok, but actually changing power at the ballot box and in government and in November and in 2028 so that we can actually say we won this thing, because we haven't won yet, but we can win.
Inshallah. Thank you all for coming to the first ever strategic forum hosted by the Left Hook and also hosted by the Escalation Trap. I want to give a shout out to Zeteo, Quincy Institute for Peace, and American Conservative. Give it up for Busboys for hosting. Everyone, please tip generously to all your servers. Give it up to Mehdi, Robert Pape, Professor Narges, Olivia, Joe Kent, and Curt Mills. Thank you all. Thank you all. We're